So for the first invited speaker, Professor Sarah Beery will join MIT as an assistant professor in their Faculty of Artificial Intelligence and Decision Making in September 2023. She's currently a visiting researcher at Google, working on large-scale urban forest monitoring as part of the Auto Arborist project. Her research focuses on building computer vision methods that enables global-scale environmental and biodiversity monitoring across data modalities, tracking real-world challenges including geospatial and temporal domain shift, learning from imperfect data, fine-grained categories, and long-tail distributions. With that, please welcome Professor Sarah Beery.
Hi, everyone. Cool. Can I? Oh, do you need to change my slides? Oh no, it's okay. No, we're good. Yeah. So hi, everyone. I'm honored to be here. I think this is such an interesting and pressing topic to kind of try to build these challenges that are really reflective of real world and impactful problems. And I'm going to be talking today, giving a bit of an overview of the space of multimodal biodiversity monitoring, all of the different modalities of data that are currently collected and the different projects that are starting to bring those modalities of data together. And I think that there's a ton of opportunity in this space, so hopefully I can convince some of you to work on plants and animals. So, why do I care about biodiversity? When we talk about things like deforestation, like the shrinking of the rainforest, one problem there is we're losing sequestered carbon that has, long scale effects on climate, on global warming, but we're also losing habitat. And with that, we're losing biodiversity. And if you look at this trend graph here, you can actually see that from the 1500s until the modern era, the rates of extinction are growing exponentially across the taxonomic tree. And actually, if you go back in time, we are currently losing species at a faster rate than we were during the last extinction of the dinosaurs. So we are currently in the middle of a mass extinction event. It's being termed the 6th mass extinction. And not only are we losing species, right? Species are going extinct. We've also lost population sizes. And that's also happening very rapidly at a really, really alarming rate. So just since 1970, so within the lifetimes of at least a couple people in this room, we've actually lost 69% estimated on average of all of the living animals. That's huge. So just in a single lifetime, we've lost the majority of animals on Earth. Well, wild animals. We do have lots of domestic animals. And that's a problem for biodiversity generally, but biodiversity is also really important for us. Biodiversity is intrinsically tied to climate change. There's been some really interesting work recently exploring how animals are really responsible for transferring carbon from forest carbon, which has life cycles of about 100 years, to soil carbon, which has carbon cycles of about 1,000 years. And that's being done through bioturbation and through active management of forests from large mammals like elephants. Biodiversity loss is tied to public health. A lot of medicines are actually generated in bio-inspired ways, but as we're seeing these reductions in population sizes, that's a reduction in genetic diversity. Now you have less genetic diversity, you're more susceptible to disease. We're seeing reductions in habitat, and as a result, we're seeing more human-wildlife interaction, and that leads to the spread of those diseases zoonotically to the population, the human population, which leads to pandemics. It's an issue of food security. Biodiversity in pollinators has actually been shown recently to be directly related not to the productivity of food, but actually also the nutrition in the food. So if the food is pollinated by more diverse pollinators, the food is more nutritious. So we're losing not just volumes of food, but nutrition. And then it's also very clearly tied to ecosystem services, not just carbon sequestration, but actually soil stability. One of the fascinating things we're seeing recently in Hawaii is invasive axis deer have been degrading basically eating all the plants, which is degrading the soil. And there's been a massive uptick in landslides. And then as we see more climate extremes, now these things are just essentially very tied together, is the point I'm trying to make. So I'm not the only person who thinks this is important. There's, a vast majority of biologists, ecologists, zoologists who have been fighting to try to figure out how to mitigate this loss, how to preserve the biodiversity we still have. But one of the challenges is there is no direct sensor for biodiversity across taxa and scale. So there is this incredibly diverse set of data collection platforms, different types of sensors that we try to use to study things from a macro all the way down to a micro scale, so that we can understand biodiversity across taxa, really understand the entire taxonomic tree and understand how that diversity is changing and what we're losing. And also try to understand what we need to fight to preserve. What are the important linchpins of our ecosystems? And these types of data that are collected, I really want to emphasize, it's so many different modalities in so many different ways, but they are tied together by this common thread of they are all looking at the same Earth. They're all looking at the same species, and they're all looking at the same ecosystems. And so we have these really diverse perspectives on the Earth coming from all of these diverse modalities of data, but they're all sampled heterogeneously. So unlike a lot of our prior work, where when we think about multimodality in the computer vision community, we often assume like registered sampling. You might have video plus audio plus LiDAR, but it's all sampled at the same time and place. Now it's like, oh, well, I had a network of cameras that I had deployed for 10 years, and then like 4 times a satellite flew over, and also 1 time someone went and walked really extensive grid search transects. So you have these different values of modalities and these different sort of depths or resolutions of your view of the Earth. And now we need to try to figure out, how do you make use of all of that together? And then one of the challenges here is that biodiversity data is very long-tailed. So the vast majority of things that we see are really just a few very, very common categories. And if you assume you need around 100 examples of a species for a computer vision model to be able to do a good enough job that it's not kind of trash, we have about 10,000 species that we can do that pretty well for. But there's another order of magnitude more species plus that we have very, very little data for. And that long tail just grows because, for example, if you look at the ocean, we have estimated that we've scientifically observed 30% of life under the ocean at best. So there's a lot more information out there, a lot more species that we just don't know about and we've never seen. A bit of an aside, but there's this thing that I just found out about that you guys should all Google called a barrel eye fish that they discovered last year that has a clear head with eyeballs inside its head that look up. Bizarre. And then also these species are really fine-grained. So I still, after years of trying, cannot tell the difference between an American crow and a common raven. These categories are very visually similar, but they actually can occupy very different environmental niches, and they have different functional responsibilities in your ecosystem. And one of the ways that people have started to get better at identifying these really fine-grained categories is bringing in that multimodality. Because it turns out that though the American crow and the common raven visually look incredibly similar, their bird calls look much more distinct. So possibly there's sort of different modalities in which the problem becomes easier or harder. And this is an amazing data set that was released by Grant Van Horn called the SSW60 data set. That's an audio-visual bird identification data set they published last year at ECCV. And similarly, along those lines, when you're thinking about more challenging tasks than just species ID and trying to move beyond that to understanding animal behavior, we have a data set, we'll have a poster this Wednesday afternoon that's called MammalNet. And this data set is trying to, for the first time, explore cross-species behavior identification. So if you've seen a bunch of mammals eating or giving birth, can you generalize that behavior identification to species that you haven't seen before? And can you do that sort of intersectional ID? How do you identify things in a general way? And this is stuff that's very easy for humans to do, but it's still very, very hard for our models, right? If you saw an animal giving birth, you would know it was giving birth, right? No question. And this data set is quite interesting. So it sort of has this multitask type of framing where you have it's video plus audio, and you have both animal classification as a task, behavior recognition as a task, behavior detection as a task. So where in the video did these behaviors occur? And also this taxonomy grounded identification or annotation of the animals. So you can actually leverage the fact that the data is taxonomically structured. You can understand the similarities across that class set of the different species to understand maybe what might be more or less similar. It covers 172 different orders, 69 families, and 173 mammal categories, most of which are at the genus or species level. 12 high-level behaviors that are shared across all of those species, and about 20,000 trimmed videos. So it's not, you know, YouTube scale, but it's a pretty nice meaty sized data set where you're not now in the space where everything is just too low shot to be possible. And one of the things that's interesting when we're thinking about environmental monitoring of biodiversity is thinking about sampling bias, particularly as you're starting to bring in multiple modalities of sensing. Because not every sensor is created equal. And then even within a given sensor, the detection rates can be really variable across the taxonomic tree. So for example, if you're considering a camera trap, which are often infrared motion triggered, the detection rates of that camera for mammals, which are warm-blooded, versus other reptiles, which are cold-blooded, might be very different. And so you can no longer assume, if you're trying to understand the underlying environmental system, that you have some sort of uniform distribution or some sort of equal likelihood of identifying one thing versus another. And now you're moving to a very complicated probabilistic space where, like, if I have a camera trap that has some non-uniform bias over what it detects, and then I have a bioacoustic sensor that has some other non-uniform bias over what it detects, and then I have a satellite sensor that maybe has a bias over what it detects based on the animal's size. Like, we can see elephants and giraffes from satellite if it's high resolution, but we really can't see anything else. How do you actually combine those things and understand what's the underlying reality of that system? And then again, we talk about heterogeneous sampling, but just to drive it home, so these are three different very common biodiversity data modalities. The top is community science data. This is data from the iNaturalist platform, 120 million species observations nearly globally. And you can see the heat map here of where those observations are collected. So clearly, not only is there maybe a taxonomic bias in iNaturalist data, people like to take pictures of cute things or things that are flowering. There's a visual bias. There's a bias towards where people go. And then there's sort of these socioeconomic biases. You can actually directly predict redlining districts if you look at if you use iNaturalist data. So there are differences in who works with these platforms and who is collecting the data. So there's all of those dimensions of bias. Then you have things like satellite imagery. So this is, I think, Sentinel-2. I can't actually remember. I think this is Sentinel-2. And there you're getting, you know, some continual coverage of most of the entire Earth at some resolution, temporally and spatially. But there's a lot of things you can't see from the air. And then when you move to something like these motion-censored cameras, like camera traps, you again have a different distribution of what's collected. And like I said before, this different variability in detection rate. All this is to point out that, like, all of this data is really valuable, but combining the data is not as simple as just like, okay, I'm just gonna like put input A and input B and stick them together somehow and run them through a CNN. It's a little bit more complex if we want to build something that's actionable and is actually giving us information about the world. And you know, really, like, the important thing here is that it's biodiversity data itself is biased geospatially. So the species themselves are not uniformly distributed either. And both, there's this rough map of global biodiversity. So this is where species are most biodiverse. You will note the incredibly dark red region over the Amazon, which you guys have been studying, one of the most biodiverse spaces on Earth, and also one of the areas that is at most risk. Then you also see where we actually have data. So this is all the species occurrence data in the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, basically the combination of all of those different modalities of occurrence data. And you can see it's very, very biased towards US, Europe, maybe Australia, and there's a lot of data missing in places like the Amazon. So how do we make use of data from different sensors captured at different times and places? Now, I will not tell you that I have a full solution to this problem, but we have started to work on it in the space of urban forest monitoring. And specifically, we've been looking at this from a multi-view perspective, where these views are taken at different points in time, but the same place. So we are using a combination of aerial imagery. This is mostly EOS at about 30 centimeter resolution, RGB, and also NIR and NDVI. And then we're using different views from Google Street View. There are ground level views of the same instances of trees. So now we're looking at prediction at an instance level, and we want to identify the location and the genus of every tree in theoretically every city on Earth. But for now, we're starting with 23 cities in North America. And this data set we published last year, it's got about 2.6 million tree records across 23 cities. It has a lot of diversity. And then more than 1 million of those records have associated multi-view heterogeneously sampled imagery. And what makes, I think, this data set kind of like a nice test bed for these types of problems is it expresses a lot of the same types of somewhat challenging but maybe beneficial structure that we see in ecological or environmental systems. So the data is very long-tailed. We took sort of like a inspiration from the Elvis data set, which is a long-tailed data set, and we split up evaluation of performance into frequent, common, and rare, mostly because, if we're being honest, the rare class performance is basically 0 all the time, even with our best models. It's a very, very difficult problem. And then we also are trying to point out that actually there's a lot of, again, similar to that mammal problem, taxonomic structure, similarity across the species that is potentially useful if we can figure out how to harness it in our models. And just as like a closer view at what some of this data looks like, one important thing to point out is that because of potential ethical concerns, we blur out the pixels in Street View that are not trees, sky, or ground. We want to remove the possibility that someone could feel that their privacy was being infringed upon. And this was actually what enabled us to publish, from Google, the largest Street View data set by an order of magnitude, is that we went through the process of figuring out how to make sure we could do it ethically. Now, if you actually look at like simple model performance, this is if you're only looking at street level prediction, and it's average recall across the categories. Now here we're looking at what happens now because we have all of these different cities. We can explore this geospatial generalization problem in a much more nuanced way. Now we're looking at if you train on this training data set for a given city versus if you train on all of the cities in the region, so west, central, or east, or if you train on everything in North America. And we're looking at how that affects performance on the test set for that city. And I think the thing that's interesting here is that generally models trained on the full data set outperform city-specific or regional-specific models, generally, which is what you'd expect. But that's not universally true. And it kind of gets at this interesting question. It's like, when is it useful to include data from, like other places? So if you look at Los Angeles, for example, if I was the city of LA and I wanted the best possible Street View model for me, it's only going to make my training pipeline way, way, way slower to scale from a couple 100,000 images of training to the 1 million images or plus across the entirety of North America, and performance is the same. So when is it actually useful to include training data, and why don't we better understand why these models do or do not benefit from scaled up or scaled down training data? And one big factor here is distribution shift, and I think particularly subpopulation shift. So here what you're looking at is the 20 most common genera of trees across North America, and then we're visualizing them across the cities in the training data set. And you can see through the shifts in color, like very, very visually, that there's these big differences in distribution across the different cities. And what we found by breaking down performance in a pairwise way. So now this is the training set is coming from city A or whatever, the test set along the bottom from city B. And now these red lines are breaking up the region. So that's all West Coast. West Coast is the north, and then like central, and then East Coast. At the bottom, we have those aggregated training sets. So if you go to the West region or the Central region or all the way up to the full training data set. Now, this is the accuracy, training and testing models across those cities. And on the left is a very, very simple metric for similarity in subpopulation distribution. We just take the histogram of, or like the vector of just number of training examples per category. And then we normalize those per city and we take the L1 distance. So basically, how similar is the subpopulation distribution from Vancouver to Surrey to Seattle? Quite similar. And then you'll see that models, actually, the performance of models tends to be quite related. And that's a bit intuitive because when you think about your training distribution, it is kind of giving your model some sort of prior over what you're likely to see. And so now if you've trained your model to have a prior for Seattle or Vancouver, and then you test that model in Los Angeles, you're not going to do very well. And part of that is that there's species you haven't seen during training, but another part of it is that the likelihoods of the species you have seen have shifted in a major way. And if you explore that even more and try to look at, what is valuable from a training perspective, this is now looking at training on any of these cities. The numbers at the bottom are showing you how many training examples we had for that city. And then these distributions are over all of the test sets for all of the other cities in the data set. You can see that it really is not as simple as just how many examples you have. And it's also not as simple as how diverse is your training data set, because the most diverse training data set is from San Francisco. But San Francisco actually generalizes pretty poorly. It's over here. And San Francisco is actually a really terrible choice if you're going to pick a city to train on and try to use it everywhere in the US. But if you train on New York City, which is kind of, somewhat in the same order of magnitude of training examples, you actually do as well as if you train on every city in the West Coast, and better than if you train on every city in the Central region. You do get a much more sort of consistent generalization when you're scaling up to that full data set. But it really kind of points to that both diverse large-scale data curation is valuable, but also that I think there's a lot more for us to learn when it comes to what we want to do if you want to actually get the best possible model for a given problem. So if you want the best model for the Amazon, what should you do? Should you only use data from the Amazon, or should you maybe think about including data from other places? And we also did find that combining information across those modalities does give us the best results, even in really naive ways. This is just using a mixture of experts. But when you think about the value or the identifiability of data, it's really not the same. So models from aerial data alone, average accuracy was around 20%. Models from one single street level view alone were closer to 45%. That's a pretty major difference when you're just thinking about this as a rough measure of how valuable or how identifiable is the thing of interest in these different modalities of data. And at the bottom, we're looking at those mixture of expert weights across the category set, and you start to see some sort of interesting things. So here you're looking at maybe these orange examples are ones that there's not a lot of training data and the model's giving a lot of weight from the aerial. And you'll start to see that there tend to be trees like palms, where if you think about it in a street level image, a palm tree looks like a telephone pole. You don't see the top. So there's kind of this identifiability across modalities that might not be uniformly distributed. Currently we're building out this pipeline at Google to be able to run this on every city in North America. And one initial step that we're building in, mostly because of efficiency from an engineering perspective, is we want to start with geographic instancing. And we're actually getting some really nice results using a super simple, DeepLab v3 model, just trained to detect instances of trees. And I think the important point here is that this doesn't need to be perfect. We actually want to maybe over-predict, but we just want to explicitly curate the street level views, because it's kind of expensive to get those queries, for places where we think there are likely to be trees. And then the next part, which is actually quite complicated, we're trying to do a better job, instead of just a mixture of experts ensemble, at actually understanding how to register these instances of trees across views. So now it's this 3D registration problem, where you have two different views of a scene, and you want to understand which pixels in each of those views are actually corresponding to the same tree. Because often we have a classification label, but there's multiple trees that are visible. And that's probably pretty confusing, particularly when you have these very fine-grained problems. And so currently we're adding another modality. We're bringing in LiDAR to try and taking point clouds of the entire scene, and then incorporating weak instance level information from street level imagery, starting with just simple object detection based kind of rough, weak instance labels that then we're incorporating into a graph-based system to try to identify three-dimensional instances. And the reason this is valuable is that if you have 3D instancing, and it doesn't need to be very, very accurate for us, it just needs to be kind of within a meter, then that both enables us to do association across, from aerial and across all of the street level views, but it also helps us understand occlusion. And this is something that's quite interesting though. When you think about these point clouds, remember, it's not homogeneously sampled. So that tree might have grown, it might have changed from the image you have to the point cloud. So there's this weakness in the system, or the softness in the system that you have to be able to handle. And then once you kind of have this information about correspondence, and ideally this actually even be pixel level correspondence, the hope is that you could predict jointly the genus and maybe even get a registration, like a better correction for that position than if you were just looking from the air or the street. So current open challenges is this 3D panoptic segmentation, but we're trying to move tree from a stuff class to a thing class. We're also actually very interested in 3D modeling or neural rendering of these different species of trees. Can we use this data to actually generate some understanding of what 3D models of trees look like? We're interested in improving our tree segmentation and ground level imagery so that we can scale up, so that we can publish more data in an ethical way without needing so much human review. And for that initial point, we really just want to get better at detecting trees in aerial and street level imagery so that we're not missing stuff. Particularly small trees or young trees can be very difficult to detect. And looking to the future, we really, as you scale out, as you start to look at, an entire city, you really recognize that there are many trees that are not visible from the street. So we don't just want to categorize the trees we can see from the street. We actually want to do a good job on all of the trees. So if you only have this more valuable data for some of them, how do you share that information effectively? How do you do a better job at identifying the trees in backyards if you don't have both modalities available at all times? How do you measure going beyond species to health, structural integrity, predicting growth, predicting future carbon sequestration, predicting future heat reduction? These are all things that cities really want to do. They want to understand not just what is where, but actually what is the future of our urban forest and what are the environmental resources that it's providing. And finally, we really are interested in this. How do you generate a realistic 3D model for every species of tree? How do we understand how they might grow? And can you actually build something like a digital city where you have realistic representations of what those trees look like? I don't know if you know now, you go into like Google, like kind of Earth, and they have like there's like a triangle tree and a round tree and kind of like another like palm tree, and then they just kind of stick them down everywhere. But it'd be really cool if the buildings are starting to look really realistic. I think it would be really nice if you actually could generate from data sets like this in an automated fashion without needing an artist for every species, realistic 3D models. And also, since we have data over time of individual trees, can you understand how trees are growing and changing, whether that is changing due to climate change by interpolating in a 3D space? Cool, so the data set is released. You do have to go through kind of a process for that. There's a lot of big open challenges in biodiversity that I would love all of you to come work with me on. Global and local distribution shift, long tail distributions, sparse, low quality, biased data. We need more interactive ecologist or scientist AI systems. How do you take a model that's imperfect and use it for science? How do you handle multimodal, multi-view, heterogeneously sampled data systems? How do we detect and categorize change? How do you know what's change in model performance over time because of shifts in the distribution or shifts in the domain versus real environmental change that you want to be able to detect? What's real change in the environment and what's change in our model performance? And there's limited interdisciplinary capacity. So, how do we grow and understand more about scientific disciplines so that we can actually make more impactful contributions as computer vision researchers across the fields of science. So we have a Slack channel. You can join. There's about 1,000 global researchers working in conservation. And yeah, thanks for having me.
We'll take now questions. Yes.
Hi, Davis.
Yes, go for it.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
Good, good.
So thanks for the talk. So what do you think is the next like methodological challenge we should take on the ecological data? Because having this problem of having all these different sources at different resolutions with completely different meanings, and sometimes you have them, sometimes you don't. So you think that like big models a la CLIP are something that should be still working on, or this type of discrepancies make them irrelevant for us?
I mean, something like CLIP or something where you're trying to sort of figure out how to handle this heterogeneously sampled data flexibly, using different ways to embed features or using stuff like attention. And I think these ideas are probably going to be valuable in these spaces, but I think that we need to come up with some methodological adaptations of them so that they'll work for these types of complex systems. And I think in particular, one of the things I've been very interested in is, how do you address the long tail, right? We get 0% accuracy on really rare species, just 0%. And you can do all sorts of fun hacks to like try to get that number up, and you will at the expense of your most common species, which you see most of the time. So now you're actually really increasing the amount of effort a human has to put in to use that model. So when you're thinking about generative AI, it feels like maybe there's this really exciting thing where we can sort of sit on the shoulders of these generative models that are trained on the entire internet and start generating realistic enough data to improve rare species ID. But the challenge right now is that the fine-grained categories are not respected, I guess, by these models. They don't understand, and we're not getting the right stuff. Like half the time you generate a bobcat using generative AI, it gives it a tail, for example. You're like, well, now it's confusing actually, because bobcats don't have tails, and things that look similar to bobcats do have tails. It's sort of like maybe just this weird regularizer. Methodologically, maybe, I don't know, maybe we don't care if it's not maintained, if the downstream performance is better. But yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that we can build on, but I think that nothing is solving my problems yet.
Which is good.
Yeah, it's good. It's fun.
For us.
So, and I think, particularly when you think about this heterogeneous, like these just like things that are sampled in different times, I do feel like there's something interesting about the structure, right? Like here with the trees, we're really trying to figure out how you can make use of the fact that the geospatial structure is maintained, even if the types of modalities of data and the views of the data and sort of all of that is changing, that you have this consistency that you can rely on in the spatial domain. And so figuring out how to effectively make use of that, I think, is the open question.
Good. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. This is Lynn. So I work with nonprofit who collect camera trap data in Kenya. And one big problem that they have is anonymization. Like the local communities would not allow the camera data to be transferred because kids and villagers were captured, and they would intentionally destroy those data or destroy the device. So I saw like Google have like anonymization technology, which can just wipe people's face out from the camera. Is there a way that this kind of technology can be embedded on the hardware so the picture that's being taken is already anonymized? And then that can gain trust from these communities who have concerns.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think so. I think that a lot of times, these challenges are very multidimensional, and one of them is really the engagement or the understanding with that local community of what the data is being used for. What power do they feel is being taken away from them? And actually, currently, it's common practice. There's actually been a few papers in ecology where these camera trap data sets that are being collected, they'll use the megadetectors, like a pretty generalizable model that detects humans, animals, and vehicles in camera trap data. and they use that and they just blur out all the humans, or they pull any data that is detected to contain a human before publishing the data set for explicitly this reason, because no one who's captured in a camera trap usually is aware or able to give consent to their image going up online. But if you actually are putting that directly in the hardware, and even more, like why anonymize? Why not just not save the image if there's a human in it, right?
Yeah.
But I think that that's absolutely something that could help build trust. But building the technology is one part, and then engaging with the community and convincing them and making them feel safe, I think is a whole other dimension. And I've definitely had some of my camera traps destroyed as well. And yeah, it's interesting. I think it's very, very complicated, the power dynamics in some of these areas.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Take the last question for time being.
So beyond the research, if you were to create your own startup to solve some of these biodiversity issues, what would you choose?
Oh, interesting.
Pretty broad, sorry.
I mean, if I could build a startup that didn't need to like operate under capitalism, I think one of the big challenges right now is that we don't have the right economic systems to value like non-extractive, like, I don't know, we're starting to think about things like biodiversity credits, but like, oh my God, I can tell you it is such a mess, right? Like it's so clearly like a bunch of venture capitalists sort of like trying to claim that they know, yeah, it's just a lot of greenwashing, and the carbon credit space is, you know, awful as well. And in some ways I think, yeah, I just don't know that there is a good way to build a startup that does this, as opposed to maybe figuring out how to build systems that can reliably evaluate impact so that we can better regulate around it. But that said, there are some really successful startups in this space, but they often rely 50 to 60 to 70% on philanthropic funds, right? Because it's difficult to build something that's profitable. Yep. Yeah, that's probably not really answering your question, but
Good to keep looking.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks for the great presentation. It was very insightful.
This is yours. I'm sorry.
Oh, perfect.
I was like, let me steal it. No, not a good idea.
It's, oh, there you go. So I need to get the slides from you to be able to do this. Oh, okay. Great.
Is that? Oh, this is your laptop.
Yes. I have another jacket.
Do you want to get it off there?
Did you allow people into the Zoom? I guess a few people are waiting.
Where is it?
It's called first one.
Okay. In the meantime, let me allow these folks to come in.
So
I can do your introduction.
which one is Mohammed?
This is good. Is that right?
Yeah, check if it hopefully it works. Yeah, sure. No, I think it should be fine. Okay, cool.
I can do the intro. All right, our next invited speaker is Professor Zamar. Professor Zamar is an assistant professor of computer science at EPFL. He leads the Visual Intelligence and Learning Lab. His research is in computer vision, machine learning, and perception for robotics. Before joining EPFL in 2020, he was with UC Berkeley, Stanford, and UCF. He was also the computer vision and machine learning chief scientist of Aurora Solar, a Forbes AI 50 company, from 2015 to 2022. His talk today is on multi-MAE and follow-ups in the context of multimodal learning. Please welcome Professor Zamar.
You want to plug this too?
Sure.
So is about 30 minutes enough, or should I cut down because we're starting late? Okay, cool. Well, hi everyone. Thanks for being here and thanks for the invite. So what I'll discuss today has more to do with slideshow. Yes. So what I'll discuss today has more to do with the multi-part and earth part, but the mechanisms that I show for learning general multimodal and multitask learning are generic, and hopefully I don't see any reason that if somebody trains it on appropriate data for the other domains, why they wouldn't generalize. Okay, so to set the context of what I'm talking about, I would start with motivating. Should I admit people one by one if they want to join? Or?
That would be kind of disturbing for your presentation, so.
It's maybe from another laptop, somebody can take control of being a host. And so it would be great if I can get rid of those controls.
Yes, there's no. I don't see the mouse.
Because there's going to be like graphics that
I see.
illustrating graphics that I'll show.
Where's my mouse?
How about I try actually an alternative? I can share a screen from my laptop. So and join the Zoom share screen, and then you have full control of the people coming in and going out. And
I see. Yeah, we can try that.
okay,
Yeah.
I think it should be very quick. So
Sure.
yeah, so you can take the laptop, and I'll just plug my. Here is the one I'll take from you, and I'll take the audio jack. So there you go. I believe so. If you, I'll join it, and I can actually show you.
Okay.
This should solve it. So let me know when you see my user, so you can authorize me to. I assume that's the host laptop. So how's everybody doing? Okay. in the audio. Should I unmute myself or?
Try that, yeah.
Okay. Can people on Zoom hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And I hope they can see my screen too.
Yeah.
And if somebody can give me feedback, if you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, sounds good. So with that glitch, we're gonna restart. So I'll start motivating what I'm gonna discuss about multimodality with an example from the real world. So let's watch this little short video, see if you notice anything interesting, unusual here. So there's this gentleman that walks in this unusual way. And if you see that where he's paying attention to primarily when he walks, which actually gives away about some cues about the underlying state. So I'm going to pause and explain what's going on here. So the name of this guy is Ian Waterman. So there's a rare disease, it's an infectious disease, and after contracting certain viruses and after immune response from the body, that it disables the sense of touch. It's very rare. But what happens is that you just wake up in the morning and you don't have any sense of touch, but everything else is working perfectly. Like you're not paralyzed, your muscles can move, you see everything else you hear, but you don't have a sense of touch. Now, the consequence of this is actually pretty drastic and it's often overlooked. I think an example of it is like if you have a glass that you want to pick up, how much force do you actually apply when you want to pick up that glass, right? So if you put too much force, you're going to break the glass. Maybe too little, the glass is going to slip. But how do you control it? This is not something that you have good, like a feed forward view to it, is that my fingers know exactly how much force that they have to apply based on my intention. So we constantly use like haptic feedback and generally feedback, but in this case, haptic feedback for making decisions on these matters. So it means that if you can't touch the glass, you cannot actually pick it up. And that happens for very broadly for walking too. So if you don't have a sense of touch, you can't walk, which is like, this is overlooked, right? What does that have to do with one? But as I'm walking, as I'm feeling the ground and the formation of shoes under my feet, I'm actually getting this feedback that enables me to walk. So that's why the people that get this disease, almost all of them never walk again, just because of disabling sense of touch. And he has been the only one actually so far that has been defied this, and he's able to walk again. Now, so first of all, that means that says multiple stories. One of them is the importance of feedback. Like most things in the real world actually happen in a feedback way rather than feed-forward way. That's a topic that is dear to my heart, but I'm not talking about it today. And the other one is about the multimodality. So there's a motor control circuitry here, but there's also a sense of touch and other forms of feedback that you constantly receive from the environment from multiple modalities. So now the interestingness of particular uniqueness of the story of Ian Waterman is that actually he was able to substitute a haptic feedback with another modality, visual feedback. And now we can look at the video again, see what's going on, and it's going to make sense. So what you'll see here is that, oops. What you see here is that he has to constantly look at everything he's doing and he's putting his steps and how his fingers are and to be able to just walk. So if he glances away for a second, he will fall. So that's why he's very, very attentive in what he's doing, and he has developed this sort of a regressed pose where he can actually look at his feet as he's walking, and it gave him this particular punch. And throughout the video, you'll see that at some point he's walking around, so he wants to look at the river, and he has to stop, grab on a handle, and ground himself in a stationary position and to be able to just look around and enjoy the river for a second. All right, so the substitution of the different modalities and how redundancy exists between them, and the fact that we constantly leave these different modalities for very basic functions. So on this front, there have been a lot more studies. So there's this paper that we probably have heard of, 6 Lessons from Babies, from Gasser and Smith, that they go through their development psychologists. They go through a list of 6 primary lessons from development of a baby towards primarily developing artificial intelligence. And number 1 is multimodality. Babies learn things in a profoundly multimodal way. But I think they go further than that. just saying that, oh, they use multiple forms of feedback from the environment. So they basically argue that having the multiple sensory systems and what they call degeneracy between them, which essentially means redundancy. Different modalities have redundancy. That's a way actually to supervise yourself. That's what they mean by educate itself. And they basically say degeneracy, to us would be redundancy, such that the system functions with the loss of one component. That makes sense, right? If you have two modalities, there's redundancy. If one of them stops working, the other one should keep letting you run, which does, and I'll show you some results on that front. But again, more than that, multimodalities, more than that. Classic is viewed to be like, yes, use multiple modalities to do more than one or be better. But it says degeneracy also means that the sensory system can teach each other. Careful observations of infants have long noted that they spend literally hours watching their own actions as a form of visual feedback that they receive. So basically, they mean that there's a vision, they say there's a touch, and they all are sensing a modality, and we don't have access to the real modality. These are all like sensory projections that we have from it. And there's a connection between these two. And now you can start training this thing with the redundancy and connection that they had this one and the other way around. And that's what they say. Careful observations infants have long noted that they spend literally hours watching their own actions. So this would be, for example, action, in this case, touch, but they're also watching. So these loops are very prominent. So to us, to machine learning lingo, often this is noted to as like cross-modal learning or cross-modal predictive coding. So I'm going to show like computational executions of part of this story, but it's actually very prominent story, very important. If you believe the development side, this is number one in the list list of 6. Okay, so let's start with multi-MAE. This is a paper that we published last fall. So if you're not familiar with MAE, I'll briefly explain it. So it's a very simple self-supervised learning. It is that you receive an image, you break it up into some patches, and you put some of the patches in the input, and from that, you learn to predict the rest of the patches, right? So super simple. This is self-supervised light. You get an image, you just break it up into 2 parts, seen and unseen, and you can learn to predict the unseen part from the seen part. And you can train a transformer based on that. So this is not a new idea, but now it's working finally because of multiple things, architectural changes. Transformers were very useful, and you can see actually the results make sense too. So these are actually predictions on unseen images. So this is what the network actually sees, and this is what it predicts. I can see little information, not full pixels are there clearly, but I actually reconstruct what the actual image was to a good extent. Now, MAE is only about RGB. So there has been a lot of work in actually turning this into supporting multiple modalities and also multiple tasks. So that's what multi-MAE was primarily about. So instead of receiving one RGB to another, to RGB to RGB, which is like this part, you can crop it out and view it as MAE, there are now multiple modalities like depth and segmentation and so on. And now once you have multiple modalities, you can create cross-links, the kind of the cross-modal learning that I was talking about. You can get this one and mask it randomly, and you can also get this one, mask it randomly. And then from this one, you would have to predict all the other ones. So all these cross arrows are present there. And since everything is randomized, all these combinations will come up. So any subset of these can come up in the input, any subset of these can come up in the output. And through, like, by virtue of doing larger scale training, this actually works in the end. So, and feel free also to ask questions if something was unclear. So let's just look at some of the results. So this is one instantiation. So this image has been a lot of patches from depth, only 3 patches from RGB and from semantic, and this is what comes out of it, and this is what the actual ground truth was, only from 3 RGB patches. So all this reconstruction, the RGB space is coming from linking other modalities to this particular modality. Here, there has been no RGB at all, only a bunch of depth and some sparse segmentation, and you'll see that the scene is similar, up to the point that RGBs, of course, you cannot fully reconstruct it is because it's ill-posed, right? So like what exactly was on the ground is unclear, but when it says snow, it actually realizes that the whole patch should be probably white. So this is another way to look at the results, is that like if you progressively mask what happens, right? So this is what you saw, is that they started from nothing and it started dropping in examples. And what's interesting here is that now there's like too much information is in, right? A lot of patches are in, and then the reconstruction is pretty stable. But in the beginning is what's interesting at how quickly these things stabilizes. From very little amount of information, the input actually can reconstruct the output. So it's going to restart. I'm going to let you watch the first few seconds of it and notice how quickly these columns, the middle columns are prediction, and this is ground truth. This is ground truth, this is prediction, how quickly this one stabilizes with very few patches. Oh, it's not going to start on its own, so I'm going to here. So it's almost there. It's like the depth is almost perfect. The segmentation is almost like aligned it like very quickly after the video start. So another way to look at it, to analyze these results, is that what happens when we move from one modality to another. So here we are getting a fixed set of inputs, fixed number of patches, and we move them from one modality to another gradually. So it goes like circularly, RGB to depth, depth semantic, and goes back. And again, what you want to look at is like this column in the middle column, is that how stable relatively this is independent of what goes in the input, right? This is another manifestation of the fact that these multiple modalities are being used in a concerted way, and the relationships are actually learned in order to actually keep this. Now, this is interesting because at some point you saw that the redness of the bus went away, because it kind of makes sense, right? If you have the depth and semantic segmentation, full information, you have no idea what color the bus would be, right? But as soon as one patch of red is here, it realizes the whole bus should be red. But as soon as that one piece of evidence goes away, it defaults into some, average gray color, which is probably like the average color of all the buses that come around. Okay. So another way, I think, in general, it's cool to see these results and especially turn it into benchmarks and compete with ImageNet and blah, blah. But I think the most of the signal is in probing these representations. I'm going to move that thing from there. So hopefully you can see my, yes. So probing these representations, especially in the qualitative way, gave out a lot more information than the benchmarks that we have on ImageNet and so on, often in terms of what's going on. So you will see a lot of these analysis in our papers in general. So here is one more of them. There are no semantic segmentation, only depth and 2 patches. So this patch is stable, it's just part of the background and leaf and so on. But we get this one and we manually change the color of it. Now we can see how this small change in the input impacts the prediction. So there's been 2 oranges here, like 2 fruits. And it's interesting that once this only one patch, basically, you can view this pretty much like 1 pixel. This is the smallest unit of information that we can put in the RGB. It knows enough about this scene inferred from this other domain that probably these 2 are instances of the same semantic thing. So you're not going to just, first of all, you understand the boundary. The model understands the boundary of this coloring, like how far this blue should extend, right? And obviously, this is like a semantic question to answer based on the information in the other modality. So it's like, okay, of course, it should be a boundary of this particular like fruit. But also, these 2 have probably a lot of correlations because what the semantics of this scene infers are 2 fruits coming out of 1 tree, right? So these are statistical relations and data are present, which means that the model has this, I would say, impressive capabilities from just learning. This one is only on ImageNet. So it hasn't seen actually even too much data by today's standards. So I realized these 2 should be colored, but the leaves don't change color, but still now. And there are many more of examples of this. You can visit the website, they're interactive. So like, the mushroom head, it only realizes that its head should change, but not. And these are also useful for realizing how much overfitting could be happening, right? Could be these repeated instances from these internet data sets, especially. I don't believe there's a blue lizard or pink lizard. So these are very useful to know that the model is not actually doing something through memorizing. Okay, these are some more analysis, but I'll let you see on the website is that how moving one patch actually impacts the final, like propagation of information. Like you'll see that at some point it sees on the screen that has been probably like a sunset screensaver. It expands it to 3 monitors, not 1. Now, one thing that I didn't mention is that where you get these modalities, we actually so still self-supervised, except for the thing that this label received. So you don't need actually annotated data sets like collected with sensory from these modalities. We actually, in the new version, we do not have modalities that would cover as, a comprehensive set of modalities. We don't have data sets that would cover as much as of them. So these are all pseudo labels. Primarily for especially 3D tasks, we use the Omnidata pseudo labeler. One of the works that we did in ICCV. There's a live demo for it. You can visit here and upload the picture from your cell phones. And this is a picture that I took before one of my talks. So it actually works very well. You can see that surface normals are very accurate. It gets the, okay. So this is the website. Go play with these slide bars and there, you get a better understanding that what I show in the slides. Time check. Okay. Now, people have extended this idea to motor control too, from Ilya and Tata. Well, I'll tell you first what they did. So they, for example, they wanted to do this in-hand manipulation task. So they basically collected a bunch of training data from the simulator, trained a multi-AMA on it, but they wanted to learn a policy to do this. They actually pre-trained, started the policy, started fine-tuning the MA pre-trained policy. So, and now in the follow-up work, they actually extended it to real robots too. So that seemed to work as well, which to me is actually a promising signal because this was still RGB to RGB, right? And it somehow went to motor control. I would assume that, and I have discussed it with Ilya and the others too, that actually having a sense of 3D and other modalities should actually even put the model, the policy further ahead. But the fact that it's just from RGB to RGB, it works, it's a promising signal. So ultimately, we really want to turn it into an actionable foundation model, and I'll discuss a little bit more of it. And I don't think that's going to necessarily pop out of purely RGB. We need more sort of a steering in that front in the objective. Also, on Thursday, we have another paper on this one that basically this, I can at this point say that this sort of randomized masking cross-modal learning in the transformer regime, it does work. It's reliably works. So we can assume that, you know, I bet on it. So if you wanted to bet. So before training, I tell that what parts can work, what parts doesn't. And this would be one of the parts that will work sufficiently well. Here, what you're seeing is basically a visual odometry system. Visual odometry is often based on RGB or depth or RGB depth, but is all assumed to be always present. So now if you wanted, can you develop some modality agnosticity? Can you develop a system if one of the sensors fail or one of the systems only captures part of the scene? Can you actually create interaction between them? So that's basically what you're seeing here. The idea is very simple, similar to starting from multi-MAE, but you randomly drop modalities. And it works. So here's RGB, here's depth. If you provide both of it, it does actually pretty good odometry. This is purely visual, no GPS, no localization. But if you drop one of them and only give it, it still does pretty well. You can see the trajectory remains fairly, quite good actually. And if you drop the other one, that happens too. And you can play all these things. So just want to preview this one. Now, since then, since last fall, we have worked on extensions and scaling up and more studies because of more resources, thanks to one of the two logos that you see up there. I'll let you guess which one that is. So now we have this model that we call 4M. So I'll give you a summary of what has happened in 4M. So basically, it's a redesigned architecture, primarily with the intention of allowing us to scale up to the point that we can today. So far, we haven't seen the end of the benefit from scaling up. I'll show you some curves about it, but let me just explain the architecture. So first of all, we have a lot more modalities now. So we had 3 modalities, depth, segmentation, and RGB. Now we have more modalities and more diverse one. Now there's text in there. There are bounding boxes, which is different format, more 3D, and like neural network features like clip, and so anything that you can imagine. So this is now a diverse set because these modalities, and notice that they're actually coming from different formats. Like this is a bounding box, this is text, these are like pixel-wise, these are sequential, this is non-sequential, but parametric. So we had to do a lot of work to make this like compatible. And it happened. Ideas have other works too, like unified IO or pix2sec. That part is also, I can say that it works. It seems like the signal is common enough in the community. So now another thing that helps a lot with the scalability is that tokenization. So previously we were primarily in the pixel-to-pixel regime. Now all of these modalities go through tokenization. So when we pre-train the 4M or the counterpart multi-MA model before, we are actually doing token-to-token. That has been very helpful too. And also this random is, there's something very interesting and effective about this random part as well. So if you get, one of the things that I've been very helpful in actually scaling it up to is that if you get some of these modalities, we were always like randomly masking some of them, keeping the rest, right? You can also even randomly drop some of them. So you select a subset of these tokens and then randomly select them part them into 2 parts, put some of the input, some of them in the output. That also works. And you can actually subsample relatively aggressively. And now this all allowed us to increase the number of modalities. We have gone to around like 10 now, but we plan on increasing it to several times more. I'll tell like with temporal information, multi-view, actionable, information like IMU, force, and so on and so forth. Those are in our plans. And the models are now scaled up to be in the billions number of parameters. And if I remember correctly, I think the training token length was about 500 billion. These are numbers that are not really possible before these architectural surgeries in the model. So I'll show some of the results of as has come out of this. We haven't made the paper public yet, but I think in the summer we can hopefully expect something with some demos. So I'll let you see the results in that. So what happens is that the consequences is basically, first of all, okay, time check, good. So the intent is to have a good so-called foundation model, if you're a fan of that term, or like basically a pre-trained model. We can just make it simple. To the point that it has some nice properties in terms of quickly generalizing a new task, or even out of the box. Of course, you want to be able to solve many tasks without doing any modification on it. But once you go to a new domain, like here, what we're saying is that out of the box, you can actually, it's a pretty competitive model. It's not only a good pre-training, you can actually use it for real world purposes. Or if you want to go to a domain, you can specialize it. You can just fine tune with little data on a new domain, actually performs quite better, competitive to a state of the art or better based on our experiments. And also you can just go to new modalities or new tasks and use this token to token mapping. It's like a generic token to token mapping and solve a new task that you hadn't seen, like curvature and so on. And I'm hoping that this becomes, this indicates a signal that can be good for prompt tuning and so on. Like an engineer prompt, express any task that you want in a set of like modalities that's a dictionary to the model, a set of tokens that's the language that the model understand. And it might not actually care so much, like if this is pixels because it was trained on pixels. Hopefully we can see something interesting there. And also it leads to a lot of actually interesting generative capabilities. So this gives rise to a model that I'll discuss more, but it's more like an any-to-any model. From anything, you can go to anything. That's exactly the way it was trained. So I'll show you the consequences of that and so on. So let's dive into it. So like I said, it can solve a bunch of tasks out of the box and it's pretty competitive. So you can see some example of it. I think, unfortunately, it's not high resolution enough on the projector for you to appreciate, but I can tell, like, these are not simple images, very diverse, like go from beach and up. But you can see that the tree is pretty accurate, like say for normals that this looking up toward the skyscrapers, this is beach. You don't even see it very well in the RGB. There's a human with the surfboard, but you see it actually pretty well in the 3D. I think this is a deer, it's like they spread legs trying to drink water. We can see more accurately in these modalities than in the, so it actually works quite well. There are the modalities, by the way, some semantic-based ones, detection, text, 3D, and so on. Some more examples, again, you'll see more. So now, I said is the effective function that this model brought in terms of generative capabilities is this thing basically that was summarized as any to any. So you can pick any modality, and from that you can go to any other modality. So that's the basic functions. Here you can example, again, it's not very well, but it's basically a battleship. I think it's a battleship or so on, grayscale image. And let's say this is the first column shows the actual modalities ground truth extracted from an image that existed, which would be this image. So image, a caption, a bounding box of a ship, 3D, depth, segmentation, and clip features. So now what you see in the other columns are using that as the condition to 4M and predicting the other columns. So in each of these rows, it sees one of it and predicts the rest. So the variance also should exist there, right? So this is the battleship and it gives you a bounding box. It's pretty accurate. You can't read it here, but it's pretty accurate. And these diagonals doesn't exist because obviously it's the input. So you can see here that, for example, when you give it text, then it gives you a battleship on the sea and everything, but it's not exactly the same one because this modality is like obviously lossy with respect to that. But these other ones are also very consistent because we generate them from one instance of inference, right? So the tree that comes out of it is consistent with particular RGB and caption inbox and so on. And you can go down this list and see that how much these variations exist depending on how much information the conditioning provide. So it's like a very basic function to be able to go from any modality to any other modality. So I can use it in different ways. So more examples, I'm going to skip it in interest of time, but if there are more questions, it works for like, clip art. This is, again, you can extract these. Like one of them says, okay, I'm gonna not attempt reading this, but you get the point that it's not a domain specific model at this point. And yeah, it actually, I think, works quite well. And these are not trivial domains. Like look at the correspondences between the 3D that we see here, like these individual potatoes, I suppose, and the surface normals that are coming out of it. A few years ago, even like just training a RGB model with this quality was not really imaginable to this. So now, in this, what I showed so far was like one to others, but obviously in any to any means any subset to any subset. You can go for like more than one, like two, use two conditions and go to any other one that you're interested in. And this is what you're seeing. Example is that now I can give segmentation and a piece of text, and then based on that, you can render RGB image or bounding box and text and 3D and so on. Any of these sets are possible. Basically, it's 2 to the power of n. N is the number of modalities. It's like I cannot fit all of them on the screen. Now, what are the things that we can do with this? One more thing to notice is that in painting comes very natural to these models because they're trained with like masking. So you can basically grab an image, take any part of it out, and then provide any conditioning from any other modality and condition on this and that. You can create multiple images. So it's like one of them is a wooden cabin. It's just put a wooden cabin there, but the rest of the image is identical, or beautiful castle or Statue of Liberty in the middle of the desert. So in painting comes very natural. You don't have to do extra work because these are again trained. Now, if you use these capabilities all in concert, you can do things that are not quite trivial before. So for example, you can do grounded generation on one image in a certain way that you want. So let's say if I have this image and what I have in mind is the moonlight photo of a hospital, the moon is on the left. That's what I want, but this doesn't encapsulate, for example, as an artist, what I have in mind. So I'll provide another condition, this time an RGB image. But from this RGB image, I can specify exactly what aspect of it is that is interesting to me, I want to keep. First, I can say, for example, just keep the segmentation, the semantics. Like I want the building to be here and building to be here and nothing else. So I can condition the 4M on the semantics that comes out of this image. And you can see that it preserves that. Puts a big moon on the left, and then the buildings are there. But we can also say that, no, actually, I'm interested in the 3D of this image. I don't care about the specific like segmentation and so on. And you can see that this time actually creates an image that is more consistent to the 3D of the original image. You can see that the building is structure and so on, unlike here that we violated. You can see the same in the food example too. So, it's like the way the rice is mounted and so on is exactly the way that would come out of the 3D versus segmentation space. So this enables kind of a more expressive interaction with these models when it comes to generative capabilities. So I'm going to finish a couple of minutes of this. Yeah. So let's say an artist what I had in mind is that they wanted to create an image like that. Like the way you go to DALL-E and type, you have something in mind, right? And if you have worked with DALL-E, is that it's impressive, but also it's sometimes hard to get it to give you what you want, and no amount of sort of wrestling the tune with the prompt does give you that. So imagine if you have what you have in mind and you would describe it originally as a local park, right? And also you can give some, benches and people bounding boxes. So it gives you something like that, right? But this is quite close to what you wanted, but not in all aspects. For example, you had in mind that there should be a lake there and some skyscrapers in the background. So what you do is that you start from there, and this time the model gave you a segmentation as well, right? So you can just modify some part of the segmentation and now you have the lake over there, which is there, and re-render. And this time, boom, the lake is in the image that was not there. But this one is also not satisfying because the tree, you want it to be full, red and, in the fall, and it's green. You can do the same. You can now this time provide a caption that now autumn tree in a park. You can mask it out and it gives you the red. And now the skyscrapers are not there. You can mask it out, put a skyscraper, that one. So notice what happened here. Getting images out of neural networks is not a new thing. It's just so 2020. But to be able to interact with the model through these different modalities and express the generative capabilities is something that is like a lot newer and a lot more like useful. The ControlNet, for example, started doing this pretty well, but ControlNet is specific to a certain domain too, and it's for that purpose. So this is a general model that gives these things as a byproduct, and you don't actually have to have a ControlNet for any of these modalities. So some things that I'm going to very quickly over is that you can also weight different modalities. If you're familiar with classify-free guidance, that's the idea. The same idea is that now if you have different modalities, actually as someone who's trying to steer these models, you can actually say a lot of this and a little bit of that, or the other way around, right? And depending on that, you actually get different results. So if you want to say abstract painting of a boat, well, this is what it gives you. If you said only vaguely be related to this, for example, 3D image. But if you increase, which is this part, like is this weak weights, this is strong weights. But if you strengthen the weight of reliance on 3D, you can see that now this boat very well aligns with this condition that you had, right? The boat is there, these columns are there, and it's still an abstract painting of both, whereas the first one was like very vaguely connected into like a very weakly. And what's also more interesting here is that it can do negative weighting. So there's a lot of biases in the data. There's a lot of biases in the world, right? If you look at a dining table, always comes with chairs, right? But imagine that's not what you want. So what we can do is that now dining table, this is a generation from dining table, but also we can put chair and give it a negative weight this time. And now it gives you dining tables without chairs. Now for text, this is easy, right? I'm demonstrating because there's an easy way to translate the negative prompt to a positive text prompt, which is a dining table without chair, right? But then for other modalities, negation is not easy, right? How do you say less of a 3D of this image, right? So this negative weighting is something that is useful when you go to many modalities and you want to interact with this model in a more nuanced way. More examples of that. And also you can chain these things. And what's amazing is that the model doesn't collapse when you change. So imagine if you start with the Van Gogh painting of Better and Arliss and say that what you want in mind is that a room with two beds, not with one bed. You can mask it out, put the where exactly you want it to be, and it gives you two beds. And the beds are similar, so it's generally consistent. But now you want to basically say that I want a painting of a room with two walls, two beds, red wall and a blue floor. So weakly condition on this one, and you can see that red and blue comes out. And you can put a base there. So the thickness of these arrows, this determine how much weight was there in them. So you can actually take this to where you want it to be, starting from Van Gogh, and steer it in a more nuanced way that you want it. And last thing is like probing the representation. So similar to the lizard or orange example, can move things around and see where they're going. So here, for example, what I'm showing is there's a bed. This bounding box is bed and it's fixed, but the field bounding box always says bicycle, but it moves it around. And we can see that how the model reacts to it. So it's interesting. If you put it just next to a bed in this particular configuration, just put a bicycle there. But if the bicycle is too small with respect to bed, it actually prints it on the duvet cover, because that's probably what the configuration. And if you put it like high up on the wall, it turns into a painting of a bicycle. And if you put it like in a stretched bounding box high up in the wall, it creates these sort of popular tile images, right? It's like how these like different parts of the representation are interacting with each other. These are good signs, basically, that the model doesn't collapse in any of these cases. Same here, you can actually fix everything, but only change one of the segments from dirt to snow to river and grass measure. You can see that how the images that come out of it are actually pretty consistent. So the mountains go snow if somebody put a snow here, whereas actually the upper part of the segmentation was those. Okay, and I'm not going to get into this, but I'll tell you that how much actually was delivered on the also foundation part. Most of the examples, qualitative examples that I showed, obviously from the generative part, it actually works pretty well. It outperforms the baselines almost all experiments we tried on, except for like ImageNet, which worked comparably with Deity. And Deity is like a specialized model for ImageNet. And even though I have to say that even though it's outperforming pretty much everything else on all the baselines, we don't want to, and we'll never compete with sort of specialized. They're just like hyper specialized baselines dedicated to a certain task. A lot of things happen to get those state-of-the-art results, but we want to have like a good foundation model. It's no need to, and I'll see in this paper, but the scaling trends are very important, right? So we went from few tens of millions of parameters to millions now. How did the scaling trend, for example, look? It's very interesting. If this continues to happen with the more scaling that we're doing, something interesting is going to be like right here. But we'll see. These are up here is basically still a model comparably smaller to what we have tried, the biggest model that we have. Anyway. Okay. And just because they had two other works in the multimodality is happening in the community, there are quite a bit of differences between what I showed on them. For example, Prismer by NVIDIA is like a multiple modality to capture text model. Yeah, but there's no per se masking or any-to-any or cross-modal representation learning the way that we did it, because that's not the intent. Image bind from Facebook is also very interesting. It's intended mostly for retrieval. It's trained with like a contrastive representation learning, but it's very useful. Actually, I like that paper, and there are lessons in there too. So I think I'm gonna skip the next, if that's good. Yeah. So I'm gonna skip this one. This was feed forward, and that's good, means I should skip. Yes. Yeah. So most of the things that was in the feed forward that you have seen now, I have to say something. So everything that I showed was like the Ian Waterman story. That was like a very feedback system and so on. And that's not what we showed, right? Most of these models that we're having, the so-called generative foundation model, so these are like a still feed forward. They're not really, they don't work in multiple iterations. But that's also quite possible. We can use, like we have this work called rapid network adaptation, which uses actually another sensing modality from the environment to quickly adapt a neural network. If you're familiar with rapid motor adaptation, this is similar. I'm going to skip these, but I'll tell you that we will have more robotic-oriented modalities in there, a lot more prompt tuning and prompt engineering, hopefully, and more scientifically understanding what's going on here. And this is what I showed. Thanks a lot. And thanks to these people that actually did all the work. Roman and David spearheaded this section. Andre also, and Teresa and Marius. Marius's poster is on Thursday. And Afshin and myself. Thank you.
For time being, we'll just take one question.
Or zero.
Oh, yeah.
Of course.
Regarding idea of scaling as a functional model, if you want to increase the model, like exponential data.
Exactly. The surgeries that I showed are to avoid that. So the signal that we're seeing is that you actually don't need to exponentially increase it. You can keep it tame. So like I said, at this point, we are in the regime that we can scale up the model with plausible compute that exists out there with billions of parameters, and I still keep it in the order of tens of modalities and so on. So no, I would say that you can actually keep the trends pretty desirable with playing these tricks, and it works.
Go for it. One last question. Yeah.
Yes. So I don't know when the next conference that I'll attend will be, but we can talk at that time. Yeah, it was one of those, the fast forward, next that I talked about was actually that there's like temporal coding, multi-frame coding is one of those modalities that should be added. Of course. I'm going to skip before somebody else. Yeah.
For the talk.
Thank you. And I'll be happy to chat offline. Sorry that we couldn't take more questions, but I'll be around.
I'll take the audio check.
Yes.
Right. So for time being, we'll skip our
Oh, I'm the one to blame for it. Yes.
All right, for the time being, we'll skip our coffee break and jump right into the next paper oral sessions. And for the next speaker, unfortunately wasn't able to attend, so they sent a pre-recorded video, which I'm gonna play.
Hi everyone, thanks for your attention. I apologize I cannot be at the meeting. I hope this recording version works. I also want to thank the organizing
Sorry, it needs to be shared.
for for Nancy's workshop. So in this talk, I will introduce this recent work for evaluating loss functions and learning data processing for climate downscaling deep learning models. And brief introduction for myself, I'm a project scientist working at the National Center for Atmospheric Research. So first, what is climate downscaling for broad audience? Here I will give some background for this work. Climate downscaling refers to the task of retrieving fine-scale details from coastal resolution source either from analysis or simulations. And there are different ways to do this. First, the traditional dynamic downscaling relies on regional climate models and very resolution global climate modeling or high resolution global climate models to do this to realize this purpose. However, this regional and high resolution climate modeling are usually the complex numerical models. They are very slow and resource inefficient. People also uses the empirical statistic method for downscaling. Static downscaling is relatively resource efficient, but generally be constrained to the assumption of temporal stationarity and also the empirical knowledge of the controlling factors and predictors, and also the prognostic bias correction. Recently, people have also started to use deep learning-based models for downscaling tasks. These methods are mostly inspired by image shape resolution method, especially image shape resolution has achieved impressive results using deep learning models. In order to adopt computer vision models for climate tasks, we would first need to understand the difference between image data and climate data. For images, as we know, the pixel values are always bounded between 0 and 255, and they are also most normally distributed. However, for climate data, the values are usually not bounded, and the distribution can be extremely imbalanced. For example, the left side of this slide shows the cross-region data set over the vast US for these spatial distributions. As you can see, the values can vary between 0 to extremely big values. It's in continuous pattern. So the difference between the image data and climate would affect many factors when we design deep learning models for climate tasks, including but not limited to layer designs, loss function, and data preprocessing, and others. In this work, I focus on investigating the impact of loss functions and data preprocessing on climate downscaling tasks. First, for loss function, I focus on A1 loss and A2 loss, as these two loss functions are the foundations of more advanced loss functions, like gain loss, perception loss, and others. Second, for the data normalization, the common data preprocessing is for linear data normalization and based on the assumption that the image values are mostly normally distributed. However, as I talked that the climate data can be imbalanced. Here I explore the nonlinear data preprocessing method, and one of the methods is gamma correction, as shown at the right side of this slide. So as the climate data can be either high dynamic range or low dynamic range, I explore both the fixing gamma value and learning the gamma value automatically. In terms of experiment setup, cross-spatial and temperature data are selected for downscaling tasks to evaluate the effects of loss functions and nonlinear data processing. So cross-spatial and temperature represents two different types of climate data. The first usually have extreme values in a sparse and within imbalance distribution, while temperature is usually with more balanced distribution, and the input we use for experiment is either interim reanalysis dataset with very close resolution at about 81 millimeter. And the one choice we used is prism observation dataset with much finer resolution at 4 kilometer. So we trained the downscaling network to learn how to map from this very close resolution input to this very fine resolution observations. Here shows the results for the different loss functions for temperature downscaling behaviors. And it is found that L1 loss and L2 loss perform similarly on temperature data downscaling. The first row of this figure shows the grounded truth input in predictions using L1 loss and prediction using L2 loss. The second row shows the difference between ground truth and predictions and input. So both L2 loss and A1 loss get good results on temperature downscaling. For price vision results, however, it is found that L2 loss function performs significantly better than A1 loss function for price vision downscaling. The spatial patterns are much better represented in the result obtained using L2, especially over the West US regions with heavy precipitation. The model with A1 loss often only estimates precipitation value for heavy precipitation regions. We assume this is because the correct precipitation data mostly have zero values. So using A1 loss will have gradient on every engine regardless of each engine's actual values, while the L2 loss gradient is related to the engine's actual value. In terms of the nonlinear preprocessing using gamma correction, it is found that with gamma equal to 2.2, it improves the precipitation downscaling, and this value refers to gamma compression. It is shown that precipitation data are usually with high dynamic range. So by compressing the high dynamic range to low dynamic range, it facilitates the training of precipitation downscaling. In contrast, it is found that using the gamma correction with a fixed value of 2.2 makes the temperature downscaling even worse. As you can see that the difference plot with gamma value of 2.2 is worse than the no gamma correction shown here. And this is shown that the temperature are already with smaller dynamic range. So using the gamma compression will actually compress the temperature to even smaller dynamic range. That makes the network more difficult to learn. Finally, let's look at performance for learning nonlinear preprocessing automatically. As shown previously, the performance difference of gamma correction on precipitation and temperature are different, and so that implies that we might need different gamma values for different types of climate data. And as a result, and with that, I try to learn the gamma automatically together with the whole model. First, it is found that learning the gamma value automatically improves the downscaling of both precipitation and temperature result. Here this slide shows the result for precipitation, and the result of gamma correction with a low number gamma value is at least similar or even slightly better compared with the gamma value set to 2.2. And both are better than no gamma correction for precipitation results. And this slide shows the result for temperature downscaling with the learnable gamma value. And it shows that the result with gamma correction and learnable gamma value is much better than the result using fixed gamma value of 2.2. And the result now with gamma correction can be slightly better than without gamma correction for temperature downscaling. And this is a brief summary and some take-home messages. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about this work or any comments. Thanks again for your attention.
All right, so I think for the questions could be referred to the author with the contact information there. Next presentation is de-biased learning from naturally imbalanced remote sensing data. Can I share yours?
Hi, everyone. I'm Daniel. And so today I'm going to present our recent effort on the remote sensing data classifications. So this is a joint work with Sudong, Stella, Charles, Zach, Scott, and Aaron. And I also want to acknowledge that this work was supported by NGA and Agent Technologies. Okay, so first start with our task. So we are interested in remote sensing data classifications. So here is the remote sensing data called SView, and it's actually the multi-band images. So you guys can see along with the RGB, and there are actually 5 different channels. So we're gonna leverage this data and use our method to approach that. So there's a first a recent effort on our in our group, and we try to tackle this multi-band images with a complex value method. So complex value methods is starting with domain and codomain symmetry. So you guys can see, given the image, and which you actually have a domain side, which is corresponding to the pixel locations for the XY axis. And the codomain side is the pixel values, which is corresponding to the RGB. So for the transformations on the domain side, and you can see there are rotations, scaling, also translations. So they are trying to map the points, the XY point, to the other locations. And for the codomain side, and it's actually doing the transformation for the RGB values. And so they are, we can do color distortions. And there's also C scaling, which is our complex value method. So we can use some transformations on the codomain side to construct this kind of image. So the codomain is actually relevant to several image types like thermal, RGB, hyperspectral, and also the SAR, which is based on the complex value. And yeah, so this is our recent work in the group published in the CVPR. And I am not going to talk about the details, but I just showed some exciting results in this work. So for constructing the complex value method, and we can actually get the more smaller model compared to the baselines. So here showing on the plots, and we actually got 200 times smaller regarding to the parameter sizes. And this is pretty good. So we actually solve, we actually use a small model, but we keep up the performance. And here, so along with our the work I just talked about, and there are another problem which is really significant in the remote sensing data. So you guys can see for the XView data, it's actually having an imbalance characteristics across all the classes. So there are 10 classes in this data set, but for the helicopter images, we only have a few samples. But for the PV truck, we actually have a large amount of number of images. So there's a really big problem, and so my work is trying to tackle it. So following with this kind of scenario, we actually gonna do semi-supervised learning method to approach this problem, because for most of remote sensing data, we actually don't have a supervision, the human supervision, like natural image data set like ImageNet. So we're gonna do a semi-supervised learning method to work on it. So first, I'm gonna show some exciting results on our method compared to some baselines. So here is the supervised baseline, and use 100% labels. And here is the CDS method, which is the method I just talked about using the complex values. And this is the recent state of the art on the XView remote sensing dataset. And here's the XView. Here's the fixed match, which is the semi-supervised learning baselines. And here's our result. So we actually only use 10% or to 30% label data, but we actually achieve higher performance compared to the recent state of the art on complex values. So before we dig into our method, I'm gonna talk about some related work on the semi-supervised learning. So the first one is a fixed match. So they use the two branches. The first one is weakly augmentation, and the other one is strongly augmentations. So they have two branches, and they get the predictions and generate pseudo labels, and use the pseudo labels to have the guidance for the prediction from the strong augmentation side. And here's the debiased learning paper, which is just published in CVPR last year. And they used the similar architecture compared to the fixed match. But along with that, they have a debiasing module, which is really good for the pseudo label imbalance. So actually, they found out there are pseudo label imbalance when they are doing the semi-supervised learning to generate some pseudo labels. So they have a debiased learning module to try to mitigate these bias in the pseudo labeling. And we also have in our work in the XView data, they actually have this kind of situation. So we try to use their method to tackle this problem. So this is our method. So given the input data, and our first contribution is that we design some robust augmentations, data augmentations, which is tailored to the remote sensing domain. And the second contribution is that we try to apply the debiased learning approach to mitigate the bias in the pseudo labeling. So those are our two contributions. So you guys can see the data augmentation side. Some previous works like debiased learning, they are trying to use the random augmentations for the natural image data set like ImageNet. But for the remote sensing data set, random augmentations, this kind of strategies are a little bit too complicated for the remote sensing data. So you guys can see those results showing on the plots. When we increase the hyperparameter M here, which is corresponding to the intensity of the transformations, and we can actually see some artifact when we apply the random augmentation in those remote sensing data images, which will hinder the representation. So those are some experiment results. So we did a lot of empirical experiments and to search for the simple and suitable augmentations for the remote sensing data. So for random augment, this strategy is actually not useful for the remote sensing data, but we found out some rotations, scaling, and horizontal flipping, which are really simple, but really useful for the remote sensing data set. And according to the figures, and we actually did a lot of experiments to find out the robust setting for the data augmentations. And here is the other characteristics in the remote sensing data. So we observe two different sources of imbalance in the remote sensing. So the first one is the training label imbalance. So you guys can see there are imbalanced data set data across different classes. Also, when we do the semi-supervised training, and when we generate the pseudo label, and there are imbalanced pseudo labels across different classes as well. So that's why we use the debiased learning method to mitigate this bias in the pseudo labeling. So here are some of our results. And we also show that by increasing the amount of label data, and we can actually achieve higher performance. So when we increase the label data from 10%, 15, 20, 25, 30% label data, we actually can achieve higher performance. And here are some other results for the class-wise accuracy. And here we apply other strategy called logic adjustment, and it actually boosts our performance. So I think our work is pretty significant, and it could be used for the future research in the remote sensing data domain. Thank you. Any questions?
Was that a question? No? Oh, okay. For time being, I think we can jump to the next presentation. The next presentation is General Purpose Multimodal Transformer meets Remote Sensing Semantic Segmentation.
Hey, hello, everybody. My name's Ethan. I'm presenting some of this work by a colleague of mine, Nee, who unfortunately couldn't make it today. So hopefully I can share some of the work with you and do it justice. And if you have any questions afterwards, I'll do my best to answer them, but you can always reach out to Nee. She'd be more than happy to hear from you. But yeah, today I'm going to be talking about some of the work. So looking at some like multimodal applications for semantic segmentation for remote sensing data. So there's a bunch of different modalities that are sort of, that we have available to us, with remote sensing. So we have some like topological sort of features, so some depth estimates. We have like, say, like hyperspectral data that we can work with. So, not just looking within the...
Sorry, I think we need to refresh this.
2 secs. Okay, cool. Thanks for bearing with us. Yeah, so we have a bunch of different modalities that we can work with. So we have different wavelengths that we can look at. We have some like shape information or some like depth information that we can maybe exploit. So there's a bunch of different modalities that we have available to us. So it makes sense to try and exploit some of those different modalities, incorporate them like into maybe a single model. So we can say like leverage the different information that both of these or the different domains will give to us. So one of the sort of like main sort of like contributions or like attributes of say like transformer-based models is that they don't necessarily impose a lot of say like bias in terms of like like ConvNets, like looking at explicitly as sort of exploiting spatial relationships and stuff like that. Some of the like transformer architectures are a little bit more general in the sense that they can sort of exploit different they're not sort of like designed to a specific set of like data, so it makes them really nice to try and incorporate them within a multimodal approach, and that's some of the contributions that Nee has been looking at to say like trying to exploit some of the like existing say like transformer based architectures to try and adapt them to work within a remote sensing context to incorporate different wavelength information and to say maybe try and improve segmentation performance for different types of objects. So we'll show you we got a quick example here. So we have, ground truth. We're looking specifically at the perceiver transformer model, but we will propose a couple new, say, like improvements to its in sense of remote sensing. So just modifying, say, like the encoding structure for it a little bit, because we'll come to it in a sec, but sort of said, transformer models, they're a bit general in sort of the application, there's sort of the inductive biases of them, there's not many there, but we know that we sort of, generally need to give them a little bit of help, within this, some like, say, like positional encoding. So in terms of, normal transformer models, just to sort of say like, where the different inputs lie. Within the perceiver model, they were looking at some like Fourier frequency information to sort of generate some positional encoding. From what Nii found is that it didn't really work so well for the different types of scales of like image of like sort of objects that you're looking at within a lot of this data. So for the big stuff, buildings and everything and roads worked pretty okay. But when once we start looking at smaller objects, or relatively smaller objects, so things like cars, really started to struggle with just using that type of positional encoding like that. So what Nii proposed is a couple new, say, like essentially like pre-processing steps that were like sort of like encoding modules like right at the start to try and rectify this issue, and got some nice results that I'll share with you now. So just in the sake of time, I'll just give you a quick reference of some of the existing work out there. Let a couple of people take some pictures if you're interested. So please like go and have a look at a lot of this work if you're interested in terms of some of the remote sensing applications out there. A lot of good stuff out there. So yeah, leave it up for 2 more seconds. Cool. But please, yeah, go have a look at the existing work. There's a lot of cool stuff out there. So I'm going to sort of like just focus explicitly on sort of what we're looking at here. Which is using the perceiver IO model, which was a transformer-based architecture designed explicitly to sort of, work across like different modalities. So we're trying to use that type of property here for the context of semantic segmentation within, a remote sensing context. I encourage you to go have a look at the perceiver IO paper if you want to have a bit more of an understanding in terms of like how it's actually incorporating, the different cross-attention modules specifically, and how it's sort of, their motivation for how it sort of creates a construct that's sort of, best suited for like multimodal applications. So I want to really emphasize, or just, spend the time that we have here looking at what we're doing to try and improve the context. We'll improve this model for semantic segmentation for remote sensing. So how can we still capture, like, how can we still perform segmentation for the big stuff? So like all the big trees and, all the big buildings and roads, but how can we still like also, perform segmentation on the smaller stuff that's out there? So things like cars or like maybe other things that are relatively smaller, when you're looking that high up. And so we sort of said that the normal sort of like positional encoding that we're looking at within the perceiver IO model, so like looking at the Fourier spectrum positional encoding features, it didn't really work so well for this type of experiment, unfortunately. It did okay for the big stuff, but for the small stuff, it like pretty much like wasn't able to say like encode or like any of the like relevant positional information for that. So we're trying to, try and find a way that can still sort of capture the big stuff, but then also like highlight the small stuff that we still want to look at. So what Nii proposed is this, not use necessarily just straight up the Fourier frequency positional encoding, but to include like a new position or a new type of positional encoding in the form of a convolutional head. So we can sort of, particularly a unit-like structure. So we can say, extract some spatial information, explicitly from the input, and then feed that into the transformer-based architecture. So this is like the first type of method that you looked at. So just using like 2D convolutions. So we have the different modalities. So we got, RG, like with different sort of like color bands. So maybe like red, green, blue, like, and then maybe some near infrared features and stuff like that as well. And they're all sort of like stacked on top of each other. And whilst like we have it that way and we're using 2D convolutions, we can say exploit the spatial relationship. We can't, we're not like as well suited to say like exploit the relationship across modalities. So what Nii proposed was looking at, a 3D convolutional type encoder, right at the start, to, try and explicitly exploit, the relationship between, like the color bands that we can see, and then maybe some of the near infrared stuff that's out there, like available in the different data sets. And now we can say like use that to sort of, you know, extract meaningful features right at the start to then sort of like feed it through to like give our transformer-based model, you know, as much information as we can. So having a look at a few different data sets, Verhingen, I really hope I pronounced that right. Apologies if I didn't. So I'm sorry that I'm not super familiar with these data sets, but some of them sort of like give you different wavelength information, different sort of like topological features that you can sort of exploit. Again, I apologize, I'm not super familiar with this, with the data sets, but I encourage you to have a look at them if you're interested. So a bunch of different experiments were formed across these data sets, and they have like the different modalities. So not all of them have the exact same sort of like features that we can exploit. Where we sort of see that like, yeah, we can use this type of approach to exploit some of the spatial features that are there, but also like the relationship between them, you know, across the different modalities with this new, say, like encoding structure, and to then sort of, you know, feed that into the transformer-based model. So this is having a look at like the data sets that we're looking at. So like, and it also gives like a pixel-wise level of class imbalance, and like why, like once like the positional sort of like or like the spatial relationship of the small stuff, like cars, like just pixel-wise, like they're not as like, they're dominated by all the other like classes that are there within our models. So that's sort of like creating a further issue or further difficulty for us to actually, you know, learn like how to predict or like segment these models or these sort of objects within the scene, but then also like the different like shape of them and everything. So it's a big challenge, but Ni's proposed method allowed us to sort of, you know, really start to be able to like, you know, improve upon like a lot of the bigger stuff that's out there, but to then also it's like allow us to actually like perform segmentation for the smaller stuff. So just having a look at the original perceiver model, for things like car, like it wasn't able to find like any cars at all. But once we start, you know, incorporating, you know, new types of ways, like, or like positional encoders, you know, right at the start, we're able to start like capture the small stuff as well, whilst also maintaining, you know, like the meaningful stuff or like the big stuff that's there, that's present as well. So it's not like we improved one and then sort of sacrificed the other. We sort of were able to, you know, get like an improvement across the board. And like this is comparing like the convolutional, so like the 3D convolutional approach, which is generally, say, like the best performing one. And I'll end off with just a couple pretty pictures just to like sort of illustrate it and just sort of like highlight, you know, yes, that it is working. So having a look at, you know, the original input here, we got our ground truth, the perceiver model. It's maybe a bit hard to see for everybody down the back there, but there should be little specks of yellow like all throughout this, but there isn't, there's none. And if you have a look at Ni's model, there's a bunch of yellow specks that correspond to like the actual like segmentation of cars and everything that is present. So yeah, like from like her like improvements like to this from what she's proposed, she was able to get some really cool results and just sort of, you know, address some of the key issues that are out there, like with this type of model, you know, for semantic segmentation from remote sensing. So yeah, and then for this is just zooming in on it as well, so you can sort of see it there. There's no yellow here. Then we're starting to get some yellow stuff, which is the cars that we're actually interested in, or like the difficult thing, like what's most challenging for this task, we're actually like able to do it now. So yeah, so I'm yeah, really happy that I was able to say share this work from Ni. So whoop, one last slide, and that's just Ni's contact information. So I appreciate you all having me here to sort of showcase Ni's work. I'll answer any questions I can, but if you want some answers from big questions, ask Ni herself. She'll be like more than happy to hear from you. So thank you very much, everyone.
Any questions to Ethan?
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah,
Please
for the
email Ni.
presentation.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so next presentation is multi-scale transformer-based hierarchical network for remote sensing image dehazing. Is the author here?
Thank you very much. My name is Attorney Zhang. I'll be presenting my work on multi-scale transformer-based hierarchical network remote sensing image hazing. And the co-author is Professor Robert Dick. We're both from the University of Michigan. I'm a PhD candidate who's in the Electrical and Computer Engineering Division. I focus on the research areas of machine learning and computer vision. Remote sensing image hazing aims to take a remote sensing image corrupted with haze and turn it into a cleaner version of the image. This work has numerous ramifications. It's involved in many applications such as disaster management and forest fire monitoring. And right now there's a more urgent need for dehazing images because there's an increasing number of remote sensing data sets and an increasing number of various kinds of applications with regards to this kind of modality. This is an especially challenging problem, especially compared to the ground-based image hazing problem, because there's typically non-uniform haze, as well as fine-grained detail loss that's not typically found in single image dehazing applications for ground-based images. Next, I'll discuss the architecture that I used to help with remote sensing image dehazing. I utilize a multi-scale encoder-decoder strategy because a multi-scale strategy helps the network detail the level of haze at different resolutions. I took an input image I and then downsampled it to a resolution of half the resolution from the original image, as well as 1/4 the resolution of the original image, giving the inputs I subscript 0.5, and I subscript 0.25. There are 3 levels, each level consisting of an encoder and a decoder. And the encoder consists of a transformer, which has the ability to extract long-range contextual information from the image to better extract relationship between both nearby and distant objects with respect to the haze and the background objects. In addition, I utilize a CNN for the decoder, which has the ability to extract fine-grained spatial details necessary for the restoration of fine-grained details for the clean version. Specifically, I'll go into the detail about the encoder, which from the transformer layer, I perform average pooling on the output sequence Y to produce an output vector, and then multiply that with the input I to obtain the modified version of the input. As a feature map may vary across different scales, this is essentially utilizing channel-wise attention to dynamically prioritize feature maps based on the relevance. This utilizes long-range contextual information for more accurate feature representation in the encoder. On the other hand, the decoder utilizes a CNN through a multi-scale pooling layer to allow the integration of information across multiple scales in order to better allow the network to restore fine-grained spatial details for the clean version. And the overall architecture of the decoder is shown in the figure below. In order to validate the model, I utilized the haze 1K dataset for remote sensing image hazing, where I utilized 320 pairs of clean and hazy images for the training dataset and 45 pairs for the testing dataset. Also utilized the specified parameters, such as a batch size of 2, a learning rate of 5e to negative 4, and number of epochs is 100. I selected a number of prior methods for dehazing, and the proposed method achieves an improvement of PSNR of 0.43. And I utilized the AODNet, the grid dehaze net, the FFA net, and finally the most recent method, the UFormer, for prior image restoration tasks. I also performed ablation analysis, where I basically reconstructed different networks, taking out various components in order to verify the effectiveness of each module, the proposed method. At first, I took the proposed method and removed the CNN decoder method. The second row represents the proposed method, where I take away the transform encoder, and each level only contains the CNN decoder. And finally, the third row represents the proposed method with only one level, without downsampling the original hazy image into different levels. And I found that in each case, our proposed method outperformed the different variations of the original model, which verifies that each part of the proposed method has an impact on the improvement of performance for remote sensing image dehazing. Overall, experimental results demonstrate that our proposed dehazing model has a higher PSNR than previous methods. This is through multi-scale methods, as well as utilizing a transformer for the encoder, and finally utilizing a CNN as a decoder. If you have any questions on the work, feel free to email me or contact me or text me via phone. And right now, I'll open the floor for any questions or suggestions for future work. Thank you very much.
Any questions? All right, thanks for your presentation, Tony. Next presentation is upscaling global hour GPP with temporal fusion transformer.
Marian, we're going to present virtually, if that's okay.
Can you share your slides then?
Yes.
Okay,
I think you need to stop sharing for me to share. Thank you. Okay, so can everyone see the screen? Yeah. Yes. Is it showing up?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Then we'll get started. So hello everyone, I'm Mary Cho, and we have Ruby Nagagawa with myself here today to present our paper on upscaling global hourly GPP with temporal fusion transformer. We are grateful to have the support of our advisors, Dr. Tolaskini, Dr. Bahavi from School of Information at UC Berkeley, and Dr. Khan and Dr. Vasiani from the Quantitative Ecosystem Dynamic Lab at UC Berkeley under Professor Keenan. A quick introduction on our problem background. Our research focuses on quantifying global hourly GPP, short for gross primary productivity. Is used to quantify plants' carbon uptake or photosynthesis activity. Estimating GPP's updated or hourly timescale is crucial for understanding important ecosystem and climate interaction, such as lag or legacy effect, especially during extreme climate events, which are projected to become more frequent under climate change. However, obtaining reliable GPP measurements at global scale has been difficult due to high equipment and operational costs. It's measured by flex towers, and there are only around 270 of them available to collect GPP data, showing the map here. Most of them are located in North America and Europe. past literature around global GPPR scaling have limited performance. Most of them are either theoretical simulation and do not take into account of long-term temporal dependency among the data. So given these challenges, we want to leverage the characteristic of temporal fusion transformer model to work around these problems. This attention-based time series forecasting model was proposed by Google Research around 2019. And TFT is capable of holding short and long-term memory through the use of LST and self-attention mechanism. It can handle a variety of input, including static data, categorical numerical features that are known only in the past or are known both in the past or in the future. Additionally, the model can forecast incomplete scene site, which is perfect for our problem. Unlike most deep learning models that work like a black box, TFT can provide explanatory through its feature importance output and temporal attention layer. So in summary, our research hopes to improve model performance of early GPPR scale models through TFT across global regions with no flux tower and to contribute scientific research in this area of new insight through TFT's interpretabilities. Compared to the solution of the notable past literature, our proposed solution operates at a higher temporal resolution, as well as considering temporal dependency among the data. The data that we use for this research is not publicly available yet, but they are gathered from these public data sources, including the GPP value from FluxNet 2015 as the ground truth of our target variable. The remote sensing data, meteorological data are gathered from MODIS and ERA5 as well as metadata about the climate and land characteristic of the flux tower sites. How we apply the TFT model with this data that can be seen here in the context of reconstructing past global GPP, each location of flux tower site corresponds to an entity. And this study focuses on single point estimate of past GPP scene sites. So the decoder length tau of the TFT model was consistently set to 1. And the encoder length K is a hyperparameter to be optimized to balance model complexity and performance in our experiments. All features that GPP measurements were available at prediction time t, as well as tau steps ahead. Therefore, these features, as well as time-related informations, including day, hour of the records, were considered as time-varying known features. The metadata of each location, such as IGPP and Copen labels, were of course treated as static covariates. Next, I'll pass to Rumi to talk about experiment design, model result analysis.
Thank you, Mary. So I'd like to start with our 5 steps experimental design. First 2 are non-time aware tree models, and the rest are TFT models. In line with the past study, the first experiment involved building a baseline with random forest regressor. Subsequently, random forest regressor and XGBoost were developed, along with dimensionality reduction. The initial experiment on the TFT followed the default usage of the algorithm, assuming the ideal scenario where historical past GPP were available at prediction time. While this model was not an upscaling model, we assumed this best possible benchmark model would help to understand the upper limit of the TFT model performance. The rest of the 2 models are capable of upscaling. The 3 FT models use estimated past GPP values from the 3 models. They are provided as input values of TFT. No GPP TFT models were developed without any past GPP values provided as input features. In summary, the best performing upscaling model was the random forest regressor model with top 9 features. GPP TFT model, the non-upscaling model, achieved 0.88 NSC. It implies the potential performance ceiling that TFT can achieve with upscaling. TFT model with no past GPP or alternative values also showed improvement. Interpretable output of TFT was analyzed with two perspectives, one IGBP land cover type, and two temporal dynamics of encoder feature importance. This slide covers the first analysis. When we look at the left table, variability of model performance is observed by breaking down the model performance by the IGBP group. We can see that deciduous, broadleaf forests and grasslands have very high model efficiency. The right plot is a transition of attention broken down by IGBP type. The overall attention is black, followed by IGBP types in different colors. There are some unique trends observed. Of open shrubland with the red curve was visible deviation from the other attention. Wetlands are trending upwards and the other have a downward trend. These findings imply the variability of model behavior by each IGBP type. We went beyond the default interpretability of the PyTorch TFT API and broke down encoder feature importance by prediction time and location to provide a new way to visualize model behavior. In TFT, feature importances are used as input to obtain a multi-head attention layer. As is shown in figures, TFT can provide more influential features in each encoder time index. The figure in the upper left is a breakdown of selected features predicting the noon of July 15, 2020 in Oklahoma in the United States. Yellow line is the overall attention, and the step plot behind there shows the transition of feature importances by encoder time index. We could see the rotational trend of blue stack, the modest band 4, in each 24 hours before prediction time. The peak occupies 40% of the importance of all the input encoder features, and it aligns with the spike of attention. It implies that band 4 contributes significantly to predicting noon in July 15. Overall, seasonality, common trends across different IGBP types were observed. Upper right is a prediction in January in Oklahoma, which shows a different shape and distribution of features. Lower left is the prediction in New Hampshire in July, and the shape has a common trend with visualization in Oklahoma. In this way, we could implement visual analysis by each input feature, prediction time, and location. In conclusion, our best model showed improvement compared to past studies. We discovered TFT is capable of time series forecasting problems without providing past target values. It lays the groundwork for future upscaling with TFT, which can potentially be applied to multiple fields and industries. We also discovered the analytical approach that enables visual analysis of feature importance in TFT. As for future work, training distinct models for each unique IGBP group can be an opportunity for further improvement. We have a website with interactive plots and GitHub repo. If you have any questions, we are happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for the presentation. Any questions from the audience here? Okay, all right, then next we'll transition to the challenge track, and Greg will give an overview of the challenge and the submissions.
Thank you, Miriam. I know we're over, so I'll move through these charts quickly, but as part of the MultiEarth workshop, we put forward a series of public challenges related to the monitoring of the Amazon rainforest. And I said I'll move through quickly, but I think pausing a little bit on this is important just in terms of the impact that the Amazon has both on the local region as well as global climate. At 5.5 million square kilometers, it's more than half the size of our host country, Canada, which itself has more land mass than both the United States and China. So a massive amount of area covered by the Amazon, and its role for both biodiversity, which we heard about a little earlier today, as well as sequestration of carbon from the atmosphere has a large impact. And remote sensing remains one of the main ways to monitor the Amazon and its health, given how remote it is and how many of its regions are not accessible in an easy way. So we put forward four challenges this year: fire detection, environmental change prediction, deforestation estimation, and also a multimodal SAR to EO image translation challenge, which I'll describe a little more. As part of the challenges, we curated a series of satellite image chips, 2.5 by 2.5 kilometers approximately each chip, from a variety of different publicly available image data sets: Sentinel-1, synthetic aperture radar, both VV and VH polarizations, Sentinel-2, Landsat-5, and Landsat-8, RGB, near IR, shortwave IR, as well as some QA channel information that's available as well. So it was only for a portion, a part of the Amazon that we curated this data for, but again, given those image chip sizes, millions of images across all those different bands, so fairly large amount of data that's available. For the fire detection challenge, the goal is to basically classify which regions in the Amazon had a fire in it. Frequently, the imagery is not available while the fire was occurring, so you're more identifying whether a fire occurred in a region. Frequently, fires happen not just for natural reasons, but they're used to help clear the Amazon, often for illegal reasons. And so it's very related to the deforestation task as well, but focusing more on where fires happened and can you identify those regions. As part of that, we supplied imagery for after the fire was detected for the truth information, and after. At any point, can you use that imagery to identify whether a fire occurred? One of the main issues with using remote sensing data for the Amazon is the pervasive cloud coverage. And so anyone who's worked with this type of imagery, there could be months where there's significant cloud coverage over a region, and it can be difficult to find EO, IR, clear imagery of an area that you're interested in looking at, which is why SAR, synthetic aperture radar, an active modality, has a lot of utility where it's able to pierce through the clouds and get clear images of the ground. So that imagery supplied. The truth imagery that was used was Fire CCI Global Burned Area Dataset, curated imagery for that for use for evaluating these models and also for supplying for supervised learning purposes, and evaluated it with a variety of standard segmentation metrics: pixel accuracy, F1 score, intersection over union.
Greg, can I pause you for a second?
Certainly.
These distribution statements are not correct, so let me pause and fix that.
Okay. Apparently a template got awry.
Yep. I think that's the issue, yeah.
Thank you, Miriam.
Next. So.
So the second challenge that we put forth was on environmental change prediction. This was a pretty challenging task, given the dynamic nature of the Amazon rainforest. But the goal was to, given some amount of imagery over a time period, and then a gap in that imagery, can you predict what an actual collected image would look like in the Amazon for a particular location? So predicting how things will change over some time period, with the time period being multiple years, I think it was up to 10 years was that gap in imagery that was supplied. So this was an image generation task. Again, pretty challenging. Just this year alone, since the presidential election, I think that Amazon deforestation has been estimated to have been reduced by 30+%, while, so that's good news. On the other hand, there's been a recording of a significant reduction in the amount of humidity over the Amazon, potentially impacting its capability to restore itself. So that's obviously a negative. And so there's a lot of dynamics that take place in how the Amazon rainforest actually changes. And it'd be very hard to predict that, but could be hugely impactful for identifying issues and setting policies. So this challenge looked specifically to address that multidimensional dynamic nature of the rainforest and try and assess how things will evolve over the coming decades. Again, multimodal in nature, was supplied both EO, IR, and SAR imagery for this, and then evaluated the generated images based on common image comparison metrics, PSNR, SSIM, and LPIPs, another feature-based comparison metric. A third challenge that was put out was deforestation estimation. Again, a lot of deforestation is due to clear cutting of the land, potentially against the law, for logging and building settlements and other reasons. And so, given imagery, can you identify where deforestation has occurred? Other efforts in this area have shown the ability to cue law enforcement to areas in much more rapid manner and decrease the illegal logging that does occur. And so this, again, is a very important task. Improving our capabilities with remote sensing can continue to help aid in the protection of the rainforest. Once again, the multimodal imagery was supplied, and as well as truth imagery in the form of hand-labeled deforestation masks ranging from 2016 to 2021. 11 months for our region of interest were hand-labeled and supplied as part of this data. And similar to the fire challenge, several standard segmentation metrics were used to evaluate performance of participants in this challenge. As a result of this challenge, there are actually 4 papers were generated. Just quickly to acknowledge those efforts, the Space Vision team submitted a paper leveraging an attention-guided multimodal UNet architecture that they worked with. Second team put forward architecture that combined an efficient net front end along with a UNet encoder decoder for doing deforestation segmentation. A third took the Segment Anywhere model, SAM, and added a novel adaptations to it to aid in retraining for this specific task. And last, Team Forever used a mask-to-former architecture for this segmentation task. And we'll hear a little bit more about some of the details of their work in just a bit. All these papers will be available on our website if you would like further details. The last task was a SAR to EO image translation task. As I mentioned before, cloud coverage is a significant hindrance to leveraging remote sensing imagery. SAR does not have that limitation. But one of the challenges with SAR is it's not imagery as we're accustomed to seeing it. It's radar returns that are processed to look sort of like imagery. And there's some very significant differences in the details that they demonstrate and how you should actually interpret that information. So in order to make it more accessible to lay people and people from a wide variety of fields, translating that SAR image into a EO visible image would be extremely useful, and that's where this task was put forward for. One other thing to note about this is SAR and EO imagery used for this particular challenge was not co-collected. It was two different sensors, two different satellites, so it was the imagery was taken at different times. So we were looking more for not just a correct answer of, well, this SAR corresponds to this exact visible image, but rather what is the distribution of visible images that SAR image could represent. And we evaluated this challenge with that idea in mind, where participants would submit multiple images generated from a single SAR image, and we would compare it to multiple images that were collected around that SAR image and take the minimum for, in this case, we used MSE for our metric. And as part of this challenge, two papers were put forth. One leveraging a conditional latent diffusion model for doing this conversion from SAR to EO visible imagery, and the second leveraging a Pix-to-Pix HD architecture. And again, for that second approach, we'll hear a little bit more on the details in just a minute. So there were a number of other participants as well that didn't submit papers but participated in the challenge and submitted models, and we want to thank all of them sincerely, because this work can be quite impactful and will be going forward, and continuing to engage with both the ML community as well as environmental sciences community will be very important. And of course, a big congratulations to the two teams that did win their respective challenges for the deforestation estimation, Team Forever, and for the SAR to EO translation, Team CDRL. So thank you to those teams, and we're going to hear from them shortly, giving their descriptions of their approaches. And a few acknowledgements to help with this challenge.
Okay. Thank you, Greg. So next we will have our challenge oral speakers. We have speakers from two teams. I believe they're all in the virtual.
Hello.
Yeah, hi, Team Forever.
Yeah.
Can you please share your slides?
Yeah. Just a moment. Can you hear my voice?
Yes.
Okay.
The floor is yours. Take it away.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sung Tae-moon of the Forever team. Before presentation, we want to tell how much we appreciate MIT Lincoln Lab for hosting such a meaningful challenge. And it is honored to be able to participate in this challenge. Okay, let's kick off the presentation of the deforestation estimate challenge. Presentation will be progressed like that. Before we get into the main topic, let me introduce our team and challenge it briefly. Our team is forever advocating for the idea that forests should be preserved forever. Our team consists of 4 people, 2 guys from the Korea Tech, Korea University of the Technology and Education, including me, other from the KARI, Korea Aerospace Research Institute. During preparing the challenge, I saw many articles. According to these articles, the Amazon is called the lung of the earth, and the deforestation of the Amazon rainforest is approaching the worst in history. At current rate of the deforestation, 40% of the Amazon will be without the tree by 2050. The tropical rainforests are being destroyed by the cultivation of ranching and indiscriminate fire and irregular logging. The scientists warned that decade of the human activity and our changing climate has brought the jungle near a tipping point. Therefore, we must recognize the seriousness of the deforestation. To understand the severity of the deforestation, it is important to accurately monitor and analyze the area of deforestation. Although it is essential to detect or monitor the deforestation area, that is a challenge because of the vast size of the area and the difficulty of the direct to human access. So the multimodal remote sensing data from the satellite is very powerful. In addition, by utilizing the multimodal data as well as the spatial temporal advantage, various characteristics of the object can be analyzed. So remote sensing data from the satellite can be an optimal solution to this problem, as it can monitor a large area in real time. As you know, there is two types of the remote sensing data, EO and the SAR. The optic sensor can see the deforestation exactly. However, the performance depends on the weather, cloud, and the day and night. On the other hand, SAR sensor can see at any time and under any weather condition. However, it has a speckle noise, and it is difficult to recognize the deforestation directly. So it is important to how to integrate the SAR and the EO sense data to conduct a comprehensive assessment of the forest dynamics at any time and under any weather condition. So we focus on the sensor fusion in a deep neural network for this challenge. The mission of the deforestation estimation is clear. The mission is to classify whether query region described with the position and time is deforested or not, using best amount of satellite remote sensing data. Okay, let's talk about the data set first. As described in this table, the provided data set consists of a total of 32 bands from the 4 types of satellite, and there are more than 11 million images. The data sets consist of the images from Sentinel-1, 2, and Landsat 5-8 with a difference in data band and resolution. We assume that the Landsat 5, which contain only images collected until 2012, would not have affected the generation of the relevant data. Therefore, the Landsat 5 image was excluded from the training set as the data cleaning process. Sentinel-1 is a South satellite, which two polarization band V and VH with 10-meter spatial resolution. Sentinel-2 has several spectral bands that range from the visible to the shortwave infrared with variable resolution. The Landsat 8 image consists of several spectral bands with the 30-meter spatial resolution. Therefore, selecting the relevant band and matching the resolution from the large data set was required. So we unify the resolution and size all satellites with 10-meter resolution. Next, I will explain how to estimate the deforestation. This is our strategy. Our teamed approach consists of the 3 steps, which are the pre-processing, training network, and post-processing. In pre-processing, data set is refined before estimation by using the normalization and fixing the number of the channel. For estimation, we find and train the best suitable segmentation deep neural network according to the different satellite data set. Finally, we learn the various post-processing procedure to improve the essential estimation the result. For the data fusion, we try to apply the deep neural network segmentation. Before the training the deep neural network, data augmentation is needed to enhance the performance. To use the diverse data augmentation library, which mostly support only 3-channel images, so we only select the RGB band over the Sentinel-2 and the Landsat-8 imaginary data. In case of Sentinel-1, which is SAR images, mock band filled with the 0 is inserted to make 3 channels imaging. Finally, linear contrast stretch is used for the image enhancement. And to detect the deforested area in this challenge, we try to adopt several networks using segmentation, which is an open source semantic segmentation toolbox based on the PyTorch. Through the multiple experiment, finally we have discovered that mask2former is the most suitable network for this challenge. So to enhance the pixel accuracy, we try to check the several backbone network. In this case, the ResNet, I used the ResNet 50 and SWNRAD for each data set using the validation set. As a result, we find the best backbone network for each satellite, like this table. To check the properties of the deforestation estimation result, we use the confidence value with the estimation result. In case of RGB image on the Landsat 8 and Sentinel-2, it can detect the edge of a deforestation area well. However, cloud directly affect the deforestation estimation performance. On the other hand, in case of a SAR image of Sentinel-1, it can overcome the limitation imposed by the clouds. However, edge area detection performance is degraded. Therefore, we need to focus on the post-processing to improve the pixel accuracy performance. Okay, so to improve the performance, we applied some ideas to post-processing, cloud removal, time series data, outlier filter, and denoising. First, we exclude the image that contains significant amount of the cloud. If all RGB value exceed 160, the pixel was classified as the cloud. Then, if over the 50% pixels are cloud, the image is not used for the estimation. Once the cloud images are removed, each pixel confidence value is averaged. However, the estimation performance is decreased due to the lack of the test query images or cloud remover. To compensate for this, images from the adjust time, in this case, the previous month's image and the next month's image are used. Despite learning from the same network, some of the prediction results were completely black. That means no cloud. And some present plausible deforestation the result. Therefore, two-step filtering was applied to the output result to ensure the overall detection performance. The clear outlier was filtered without the 3 sigma range at the first filter step. And second filter used 1 sigma range using the predicted deforestation percentage in this image. Using the filtered output image from the previous step, all image was averaged to create a single binary image. Finally, the preliminary result is denoised with the opening operation, which is one of the most used, the morphology operation. In this equation, the I and M are the original image and structuring element respectively, and minus and plus operation are erosion and dilation operation respectively. So the image on the right is the final result example. Next, I will explain the experimental result. To verify the performance of the interpretation estimation, we improved the algorithm while adding the post-processing. The score is extracted from the submission site. Okay, the performance result of the original mask to performer without any post-processing is less than the 90% pixel accuracy. But after applying the post-processing, overall performance is improved by 1.4%. So the final result is 91.139. To confirm the deforestation estimate, the image of the piece was stitched together to create a large image. So the image on the left is generated based on the 10 by 10 Sentinel-2 satellite fragment imaging from the validation set. The image on the right shows the estimate deforestation for this image. Show the estimate of the deforestation for this image. The image was captured on July 1st, 2019. And next image was taken at the same location on the different day, June 50, 2020. Even if a cloud obscured in entire image, we found that the proposed algorithm can detect deforestation well. And the third image was taken at a different place on the same days as the first image shown. It's worked well. Okay, here is the conclusion. To precise estimate the deforestation of the Amazon forest, at first, we recognized the multimodal satellite data set based on the scientific index. Secondly, we developed a deforestation estimation procedure with the following 3 steps, which are pre-processing, training network, and post-processing. And finally, our proposed algorithm achieved 91.7 pixel accuracy. Anyway, we hope that this study will be of some help to the preservation of the Amazon forest. Okay, thank you for your attention.
All right, thanks for the presentation. Do we have any questions in the room? All right, we will move to the next presenter, Jingi Gu from for the SAR2U image translation.
Jingi Gu. Hello, can you see?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you go to the first slide?
Oh, yes.
All right, great. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yes. Hello, everyone. We are the CDR team participating in the SAR2U image translation track of MultiEarth 2023 challenge. My name is Jingi Gu. I am a master student at Hanban National University, and I am mainly conducting research using remote sensing images in topics such as change detection and semantic segmentation. Now, I will present the solution we applied in the SAR2U image translation track. And the presentation will be structured as follows. Firstly, in the introduction section, we will provide a brief overview to the challenge and explain the objectives of the SAR2EO image translation track. Next, we will present the pre-processing method that our team performed and the models that we applied. And then we will present the experimental research and analysis of them. And finally, we will draw conclusions. The MultiEarth 2023 challenge is exploring new approaches to environmental monitoring in Amazon rainforest areas. And the challenge provides electro-optical data and synthetic aperture radar data. EO data is visually appealing, but can be affected by weather changes, lighting conditions, and environmental noise. Meanwhile, SAR data can compensate for the limitations of EO data, but it has sparkle noise and is difficult to interpret visually. Accordingly, the SAR2 image translation track aims to convert visually difficult to interpret SAR data into cloud and noise-free EO data. The Sentinel-1 data provided in the competition consists of VV and VH, totaling 718,706 flow story2 data. The Sentinel-2 data consists of bands V1 to V12 and QA16, totaling 5,241,119 unsigned in 16 data. We need to construct a cloud-free and clear SAR-EO pair set to train our translation model on the provided data. To do so, we propose an effective algorithm called the Clean Collect algorithm, CCA, to select cloud-free and night-free images. First, we use the QA6 band mask to remove images containing clouds. We also find that EO data contains clouds if the pixel value is above a certain threshold. So we use the threshold obtained from our experiments to remove cloud images. We use the pixel threshold of 4096. Next, we use the brightness and low value pixel ratio of the image to remove no data and nighttime images. Specifically, after converting to HSV, we remove images with an average brightness lower than 30. Also, we remove images in which number of pixels with a pixel value lower than 10 exceed 10% of the total pixels. Finally, we measure the FID score for feature-based cloud remover. First, we build a handcrafted subset of 1,000 cloud images. Then we calculate the FID score of each EO image based on this subset. Using the calculated FID score, we apply the formula in the bottom left to determine the FID score threshold, and only select images that exceed the threshold. We set the data quality parameter beta to 0.4. Through this process, we constructed a dataset consisting of approximately 23,000 paired data samples. Before entering the model, we performed two SAR data pre-processing steps. First, as in reference 1, we applied a method of expanding SAR data consisting of only VV and VH to 3 channels. which has the effect of scaling the SAR data. Secondly, median blur is applied to remove the sparkling noise in the SAR data. This helps to achieve a smooth effect in the image. An example image of this preprocessing is shown in the image on the right. The models we used are the pix-to-pix HD model for Sartorial image translation and the Westholm model for image enhancement. We use the EO images generated by pix-to-pix HD directly as inputs for the Westholm model. I would like to introduce an alternative configuration that achieved a similar level of performance. First, we apply the tanh function to minimize the impact of alloys in the input SAR data. In addition, we introduced an error node that compares the generated EO images with the original EO images, thereby combining it with the pix-to-pix HD GAN nodes. We submitted 3 models. Assumption 1 is a setup using dataset 1 without the restomer. Assumption 2 is the same setup using dataset 1, but with the restomer applied. Finally, assumption 3 used dataset 2 with tanh applied and added error nodes to pix-to-pix HD. In the end, assumption 2 achieved the best score, while the other setup, assumption 3, performed similarly. This slide contains an analysis of the research of each submission. The figure on the right shows the test images generated by each submission. You can see that assumption 2 achieved the highest performance, but visually, assumption 3 shows the best results. We believe that this research achieved better performance on blurry images because the metric used in the competition is similar to MAE. For the next competition, we recommend adding a variety of metrics to evaluate image quality. The final conclusion, we proposed a CCA method that can effectively remove clouds and various noises and achieved a final performance of 0.07313, ranking first in the Sartorial image translation track. While choosing a high performance model is important, efficiently removing noise data from the training dataset is also essential. We would like to thank Min-Seok Seo and Jong-Jang Park for their technical assistance during the competition. That concludes the presentation. Thank you for your attention.
All right, thanks for the talk. Any questions from the room? All right, so for next, oops, not that. I want to move to the award announcement. Yeah, so we want to announce that the winning teams of the challenges are Team Forever and Team CDRL. Congratulations, since they could not come in person, we will send the award certificate. And all right, so thanks everyone for coming to the workshop and staying till the end of it. And there were many people who supported and spent lots of time and efforts to make this workshop possible. And I would like to take this time to acknowledge those help from the MultiEarth organizers and folks from the MIT Accelerator, Lincoln Laboratory, Scale AI, and also the folks who submitted the papers and also participated in our challenge. So that completes our workshop, and have a great time for the rest of the conference, and I hope to see you guys again next year.